Yeah. Okay, cool.
Right.
The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Monday, July 29th. And I'm really, really happy to have with me Adam Mossoff. I think most of you know Adam. He's been on the show before. We've talked about IP. He is one of the world's preeminent experts on IP and maybe the strongest defender of IP out there in the world right now. So important, crucial fight if you want progress and you want capitalism or remnants of capitalism, whatever we have left. And of course, is a professor. I'm not going to get the titles right, but he's a professor at George Mason University at the Scalia Law School. Has been there for a long time. Adam and I have known each other since the 1990s when we were in the OGC together, the Objectivist Graduate Center.
Yeah.
So welcome, Adam. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Yaron. It's really great to be here. Really, always am honored by the invite.
Good. So one of the reasons I invited you, I mean, there are many because we'll talk about IP and we'll talk about those kind of issues, which I think are always crucial, was kind of since October 7th, I've just seen you on Twitter primarily, super active with regard to what has happened, primarily what has happened on campuses, and the protests on campuses and the rising anti-Semitism on campuses. I see you super active on that. And I know recently you took you helped organize a group of legal scholars to do a trip to Israel and went to see some of the sites of the horrors of October 7th. I actually talked about it with Boaz on I should do a show in Hebrew, and we talked about your trip there a little bit on that show. So let's start maybe with what did October 7th kind of mean to you personally, I guess? I mean, you're an objectivist. You have Jewish origin, just like I am, right? But you're an objectivist. But you're not Israeli. You don't really have a connection to Israel, or a strong connection to Israel that I know of. What did October 7th mean to you? And then maybe what did the protest mean? Because I think that's a whole other dimension.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so for those who know, my online presence has been almost entirely in the context of intellectual property and innovation policy and talking about moon rockets and stuff. I'm a geek. But October 7th really shocked me to the core. And as it did everyone else, and rightly so. And it woke me up in a certain sense. Especially when when you saw the response in the United States. Barry Weiss framed it once in one of her talks as she said, American Jews got complacent. We made a mistake and we felt like it couldn't happen here. And that was a mistake. It can. And it was kind of a slap in the face that, yes, I'm an objectivist. I was raised Jewish and I haven't really identified as being Jewish, but that to nihilists and Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and the people protesting on campuses and the streets of the United States, they don't care. They're collectivists and they'll send me to the gas chambers or slaughter me and my family just as much as they will anyone else because they view me as being Jewish.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always been my case for why I support Israel. I mean, in an ideal world, there would really not be a Jewish state. You wouldn't support a Jewish state. But the world doesn't care if you want to assimilate or not. The world doesn't care. What was there's a test of how much Jewish blood, whatever the hell that means, you have in you, and you're
Yeah.
off to the gas chamber if you have it, no matter what your professed beliefs are,
Yeah.
or what you hold. So Israel's there as an escape valve. Somebody we need, Jews need to go somewhere when they're out to get us.
Yeah. And,
Having it is important.
and it's a, and it really is an interesting phenomenon how, this 2000-year-old, Jew hatred, exists and not just existed, but has persisted and gotten worse in the modern era. And my kind of pet theory on this, we never talked about this
Yeah,
before, so I don't know if
yeah,
you've shared, is that kind of, you know, in it, well, so my view on it is anti-Semitism is always the tip of the spear of kind of a broader nihilistic ideology that is anti-Western civilization. It's anti-freedom, anti-reason. And Jews, if you have this perspective, this nihilistic perspective, and especially today, this intersectionalist, Marxist perspective, Jews kind of are the constant exemplar of what's wrong with your theory. Because they're the oppressed people for 2000 years, and yet they integrate and they succeed far
yep.
beyond their scant numbers. And so in a certain sense, you have to rid the world of Jews because they come to exemplify and embody everything you hate and also everything that's wrong with your theory.
Have you ever read Karl Marx's On the Jewish Question?
I read a portion of that essay. Yeah. I mean, and he as all evil people do, right? He exactly identified this, right?
And he identified, yeah, I mean, he says the problem with Jews is they're selfish in a good way,
Yeah, they're capitalists. Yeah.
capitalist. And the
Hmm.
problem with the Christians is they're too Jewish.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
adopted
Yeah.
Christianity. They've adopted capitalism and self-interest. And it's true. I'm actually reading a book right now called Constantine's Sword. You ever
Hmm.
it was
Yeah.
it's about the origins of anti-Semitism
Hmm.
in it's written by a Catholic in Catholicism in the church from the beginning, from the very beginning,
Hmm.
and it's fascinating. It really is fascinating. And Marx grew up in a very anti-Semitic Christian environment, even though his parents were originally Jewish, but he grew up in a Christian environment that was very anti-Semitic at the time,
Hmm.
with all the tropes of all the stories about it. And you need an other, and you need an other to blame everything on.
Hmm.
And successful Jews are yes, a repudiation of everything they believe in.
Yeah.
Uh, so, so tell me a little bit about how you. I mean, we agree that basically the whole. I mean, the left's attitude towards Israel and Jews is driven by this intersectionality. It's really I've talked about this a lot on my show. It's really just a consequence of what they've been studying in school for the last 10 years, 15
Yeah.
years, really 100 years, but manifest particularly in the last 10 or 15 years. Did you experience any of this at George Mason? How did you respond when you started seeing this at Harvard and Columbia and all these places?
Oh, so yeah. So in part, it was so I guess I'll start with George Mason. So our law school actually is physically separated
Yeah.
from the main campus. And the law school has been fantastic. We've had no protests at the law school, no shutting down of classes and no encampments or anything. And there's actually been some debates and some panels held on the international law issues and things of that sort. The George Mason University itself is one of the universities that's currently under investigation by the Department of Education for failure to properly protect and Jews from harassment. There were the protests. They didn't have encampments, as far as I'm aware, but there were some very aggressive protests and harassments of Jews on George Mason's campus, and the president wasn't responding to it in the same way that that the other presidents at other universities weren't either. It was all context and we have to be worried about Islamophobia. And he literally sent out an email about that while Jews are being assaulted and attacked.
Yeah.
And again, and then when watching the stuff go down, I actually went to graduate school at Columbia University, and we all know that Columbia was ground zero for the Columbia and Berkeley were ground zero for the '60s riots and protests. And I was really tracking this stuff, and this is one of the reasons why I kind of engaged more and changed my presence on social media and on Twitter, especially on this issue, is because I was feeling very despondent. Like I need to speak out about these issues and I need to address them. And I can't be silent. And there's kind of a meme that I've adopted. It's if you ever wondered what you were doing in 1938 in Berlin, you're doing it now. And so I felt as a professor and as a scholar and as someone who is actually in the academy, I could speak out on these issues in a way that was kind of more effective in terms of my understanding of from the ground of what's going on. Because the reality is that, as you're on exactly what you've said, the silver lining in all of this happening is that nothing has changed actually in the university in terms of the content and what has been advocated by professors and students for decades now. It's just that the public has been made aware of it through these protests and through the congressional hearings. I mean, so all of the stuff that they're saying has been said for years and years in classrooms and by speakers. And it's just now that they're publicizing it outside of the academic context and they're acting on it. They're actually assaulting Jews and engaging in the type of brown shirt activity that we saw in the 1930s.
Yeah, and I think maybe it was always anti-Jewish, but it seemed like it was also kind of just European, anti-white, however you want to characterize it in the past, and that was just brushed over because whites are the majority and who cares kind of thing. But once they started targeting Jews, people really seem to have woken up to what is actually going on.
Yeah, and there was a lot of
Black Lives Matter was the same thing, right? It was the same, but maybe it started out as a true protest, but it very quickly descended into clearly just a racist kind of intersectionality, really bad. But it didn't wake people up. People didn't really realize what was behind it in the way that these protests have.
Exactly, and part of it is also kind of most Jews are left of center in some way, shape, or form. They're liberal or far left, and they always felt like they were kidding themselves. I mean, they always felt like, well, we're the oppressed, so we're class in this intersectionality DEI, ideological framework. We're in the oppressed category because we're Jews. And they were lying to themselves because the other people who were teaching intersectionality and DEI were very clear that they embraced this kind of Soviet, framework propaganda of Israel as a white colonial settler state. I actually have a extended Jewish family member who's Mexican. His name's Ramon. He's clearly Mexican. And when I saw him last April, I said, "So Ramon, how does it feel being a white colonial settler?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, so, and so part of that was also, I think the protests kind of made it very clear to people who had been evading. I mean, the reality of this ideology that they had been accommodating and sanctioning for a very long time and agreed with in some respects. That you are the people that will be hanging from the lamppost when we take over.
So you getting any backlash from people at the law school?
No, not the law school. So my law school is an incredible beacon of free speech and respect for the rights of the professors to speak on their own about the issues that they care about. We've adopted something similar to the Chicago free speech principles. It's on our website, and in fact, the only harassment I ever got was from some senior official, the vice president of brand at George Mason University, who saw one of my tweets about how the DEI training at George Mason includes this claim that words are violence, and there's a picture of a BLM symbol. And so I commented on that, and he emailed me this kind of very informal email, like, oh, I asked our DEI director and they didn't know what you were talking about. And so you have evidence of what you've said. And so I replied to him, and I CC'd my dean of my law school
Yeah.
saying, I do have evidence. I have a screenshot of what I saw, and I'm really surprised that your DEI director doesn't know her own training materials. And I very explicitly conveyed, I said, and by the way, you're contacting me about speech outside of the university. And this is wholly unacceptable that that this is my personal Twitter account.
Okay.
And this is not affiliated with the university in any way, shape, or form. And so you shouldn't be doing this. And then he emailed me back saying, oh, well, this is just an informal conversation, because that's how they always do it. That's how they want to trap you. And I didn't reply to that. I never heard back from him. But I have some of my other colleagues have been formally contacted by the DEI office for their tweets and things of that sort, about complaints that have been filed. And we all do the same thing. We just ignore them. Because our position
Good.
is, if you want to come after us, fine, but you have to do that and do it explicitly. And they and
Yep.
and they won't do it at our school or law, at least at the law school, because they know that we'll fight them.
Yeah. So you organized this trip to Israel. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is kind of, I fell into this a little bit. So I had a colleague, a lawyer who I know, a patent lawyer. He went to Israel and visited the October 7th sites of the
Yep.
massacres and atrocities in January. And so when I saw him at a conference in March, I was kind of telling him how, I was really impressed that he did that. And I was somewhat, and I said, I really wish I could do that. And he's like, oh, well, I did this through the World Jewish Congress. They've been organizing these missions. So, I can connect you with them. And so he did. He just did a, introduction email. And I had a meeting and a Zoom meeting with them in April, and they mentioned to me, in addition to, yeah, you can join one of these missions. They said, well, we just did a mission for some federal judges. And I said, oh, well, that's really interesting because, I know a lot of law professors, and it would be really good to have law professors go, because we sit at this intersection of academia and kind of policy real world. And so we can kind of take what we learn and kind of deploy it in writing and op-eds and things of this sort. And so they said, great. So you collect the professors, and if you have meetings you want to propose to us, we'll help organize it and we'll do all the logistics. And so it was kind of this nice little union. It ended up being a lot more work, as always, planning these things than I expected. I ended up having to email about 180 people, but we got 13
Also,
people.
that many law professors.
Yeah, that many law professors, and almost all of them said, I would love to come, but I already have either a conference I've committed to speak to or a family trip in the
Yeah.
summer, because it was 2 months away. It was 2.5 months
Sure.
away. We all plan our calendars way out in advance. So we ultimately ended up with 13 professors. And it was the purpose of it was to bear witness to October 7th, is the term in Judaism, to a fact-finding mission about what actually happened on October 7th, and to speak with officials and lawyers there in Israel about kind of what's been happening since then, what's been going on in the international institutions and things of that sort.
So how many people went and how did it go?
Yeah, so it was 13 total professors. Five of us, it was our first time in Israel. Four of the professors were not Jewish. And it was a wide range of people with, some intellectual property people, because that's what I do, but there were
Yep.
con law
Yep.
people and others. And it was a very intense experience,
Sure.
and really memorable. And, this term, once in a lifetime and things like that is often overused, but it really was. So, it ended up being kind of a bonding experience for all of us. So 3.5 days started in Jerusalem. Then second day was down south, at the October 7th sites. And then third day was in Tel Aviv with meetings in the morning we watched the film of the Hamas atrocities, and then and we met more with officials and lawyers at Tel Aviv. It ended that night, and then I flew back the next day. Yeah.
Okay. So a really quick trip.
Mhm.
How did the other professors who hadn't been to Israel or never been there before, how did they take it all?
Everyone was blown away. I mean, we all came away from the trip like with a much deeper appreciation, especially for those of us who was our first time, of Israel and what Israel represents. The good aspects of Israel, of Israel. I mean, it is this beacon of Western civilization in just a total area of the world that is utter barbarism, and
Yep.
that's why it's attacked. That's why it's constantly being savagely attacked. And so and it really was one of those experiences that was ended up being even more important than any of us could have realized, because we've all read reports and we've all read descriptions of what happened on October 7th, and we've all and I've watched many online videos shared and things of this sort, but
Sure.
to actually be there and see these things and hear from survivors and hear from soldiers what happened, it was entirely different experience.
So how's this changed, if at all, kind of your perspective on life in America, what you see in the future, politics? I mean, how has this changed the way you kind of approach the world?
Well, it's made me that's an interesting question. Because I've been viewing it primarily through the lens of how to advocate on behalf of Israel in this war and things of this sort. Um, so it has made me, I think, in a certain sense, take less for granted what we have in this country.
Yep.
As I mentioned earlier, this comment by Barry Weiss that really resonated with me when I heard it, which is, that Jews in America felt for like 50 or 60 years that they had finally escaped history, and that was a mistake. I mean, and now we as objectivists already get that, because it's about ideas. It's about ideas drive cultures just as much as they drive individual lives. And so, of course, it could happen here. It could happen anywhere. But I
Well,
got,
Leonard predicted it in ominous parallels, right? I mean,
yes, yes. And we're seeing many aspects of those
oh,
predictions
absolutely. Absolutely.
coming to light. And so, but Israel's on the front line. I mean, this is the front line of exactly this clash of ideas, in military conflict and in savagery. And it really kind of brought that home in just a profound way. I mean, the I've written some essays on Facebook that are accessible to the public about what I saw, but at kibbutz near Oz, where they had 46 people murdered, children, people burned alive in beds, 76 people taken hostage. I mean, you could still, I mean, the stench of death was still strong in the air 9 months later.
Wow.
I
Wow.
mean, because they had 46 dead bodies, and they didn't know what, I mean, so they put them all in the walk-in refrigerator in their dining hall. And you just within 100 feet of that dining hall, it's death.
Wow.
And I mean, if anyone smelled that, they know what that smell is, and it never leaves you.
Yeah.
And just to see the bullet holes and the burned out buildings, and to hear the stories of what actually happened, from the people who survived, you know, and just to, I look in the dining hall, they have all these little posters of the people who were killed and the people who were taken hostage. And I just looked down at one moment, and on the table there are the two posters, and one says, this little boy, 5.5 years old, killed.
Yeah.
Another was a 6-year-old boy killed. It is crushing. I, that, you know, I mentioned this in my essay, or the essay, one of the essays I wrote. We studied the Holocaust, we studied atrocities, what happened, the killing fields in Cambodia, but to see it like that,
Mhm.
and to see the videos of the people doing it, and their joy and glorification in it, it just makes it so much more real what we face and the value of what has been achieved in America. I mean, really, when we talk about America being this beacon of freedom, this beacon of reason, this everything Ayn Rand talked about when she said, that she's not religious, but she gets down on a knee, thanks the founders for what they created in this country. That's all 100% very much more real to me in a way that it wasn't before.
And at the same time, does it make you more afraid of what's happening here?
Uh, yes. Yes. I mean, well, and especially, just the the glory. Especially with the protests and the lack of response to the protests by the government. The outright, the protesters, these pro-Hamas, and I've always been calling them pro-Hamas activists and
Absolutely.
protesters. They're not pro-Palestinian. They're not peace. They're pro-Hamas. They've been engaging in trespass, vandalism, harassment. Attack, physically assaulting Jews in the streets. The morbid joke now is, people keep saying to me, "What was it like in Israel? Did you feel unsafe?" And I said, "Well, the joke is actually it's safer to be a Jew in Israel right now than it is to be a Jew in New York City." It's not
Yeah,
really a
but
joke.
maybe for a few more days, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, at least we never were in the north, right? We
Yeah,
were always,
my
yeah,
family's all in the north, so
yeah.
yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry
yeah,
to,
it's
yeah.
rough.
That's why we didn't go to the north because of that. We stayed,
Yeah,
in the middle in the south. But and and so it should, and I've been calling them modern brown shirts because they are, they've embraced, as Dr. Peikoff had described so eloquently in the ominous parallels, the same nihilistic ideology, and they're acting on it. And they're not, and just like in the 1930s in Germany, they're not, our officials either at worst agree with it, or B, are morally disarmed, and
hmm
so that they don't feel like they can step in and arrest these people. And we've seen like reports like, oh, like they arrested the protesters, all of those protesters in Colombia. Every one of them was let go without charges being
yep,
pressed. And even when Netanyahu was here, and they were rioting in the streets, and it literally physically attacking police officers. They videoed themselves just like the Moss. They videotaped themselves physically attacking police. Every one of them has been let go with no charges pressed.
yeah,
And so all of that does, that emboldens them, just like it, because they
absolutely.
see, I'm right. My advocacy for this nihilism is right, and there's nothing to oppose me.
Yeah, I know it really is scary out there. Um, and the numbers, I mean, there are quite a lot of them. Although, I, I'm heartened by the response of some of the alumni, and as you said, they've woken up. I think if Americans wake up, they reject it. So I don't think we're on the verge of becoming Nazis, but it is scary that such a large percentage, particularly of students, are like this.
Yeah, well, and as Dr. Peikoff details and explains very nice, clearly in his book, um, that the ominous parallels, it comes from the universities, it comes
Oh
from the
yeah.
intellectuals. It can, the universities played a huge role in the 1930s with the Nazis, and
Yep.
and this is again all a unfortunate confirmation of Ayn Rand's, insight that ideas are the drivers of cultures and of individuals' lives. And it's the ideas that these people are learning in their schools. They've been taught, that America is evil, and that and and Israel as a representation of Western civilization is evil as well, and they should all be wiped off the face of the earth.
Yeah, and they're not afraid to say that out loud in the streets of America. It's pretty stunning.
They spray painted on the Columbus Monument outside of Union Station, "Hamas is coming,"
Yeah.
and nothing came.
And they will be the first ones to
Yeah,
be, So, I mean, that's part of the thing. It's the what gays for Palestine
yeah,
insanity but that's what intersectionality does to you. It's completely divorces you from reality.
yeah, yeah. And and I am, and like you said, it's hopeful that some people are waking up. Some donors have said, I'm not giving money anymore to Colombia and
Yep.
stuff like that. But a lot more of that has to continue. People really have to start, and parents have to start saying, you know, I'm not sending my kids to college if this is what, if this is what they're going to
Absolutely.
become. Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a comic that's been shared around on social media. I'm sure you've seen it, where it's two parents with their college kid at dinner table, and the kid is dressed in a Nazi uniform, and the parents are saying and the caption of the comic is the parents are saying, "Your mother and I are concerned about what college is turning you into."
Concerned. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm finding it difficult to get any campus to let me come and give a talk on Israel
Yeah.
because they won't pay for the security. So and they just don't want it. They don't want the hassle.
I mean, and yeah, and it's shocking what's been happening. I mean, I assume you've talked about this in your show and other things, like when the pro-Hamas activists took over UCLA, they actually took over buildings, campus
Mhm.
buildings, and they were checking student IDs. And if
Yep.
you were a quote Zionist, which is their code word for Jew, they weren't allowing you into the building. I
Yep.
mean, this is straight on. I mean, there's photos of brown shirts blocking buildings at University of Hamburg and University of Berlin, for not letting Jews enter. I mean, it would be funny if not that we're talking, these are life or death issues for both us and our culture and our society and our children.
Yeah. There's no question. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's a hard turn. How do we move to a different topic?
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah.
But let's shift to talk a little bit about IP, and in particular, this administration has been particularly bad on drug pricing and drug IP, and kind of a price controls. I mean, there's a number of price controls they've got on the best-selling drugs, but expanding from there. So what is your sense of IP protection, particularly right now in the healthcare space and government intrusion into that space?
Yeah. We it's a real disaster. And it's a disaster. It's kind of a slow rolling out disaster because we're not going to see the ultimate effects of all of this for years to
Yeah.
come. But we crossed a Rubicon in the past 4 years. So for the very first time, the government actually, in the Inflation Reduction Act, one of the Biden administration, signature, laws that they promoted and got helped get enacted, imposes directly price controls on
Yeah.
on drug patents. I mean explicitly. I mean something that's never been done before in this country ever. The law. I mean, so this isn't like an agency interpretation of an ambiguous law. This is direct. Here are the National Health Services are to identify the top 10 selling drugs and to impose what they think is what is a fair return, a fair price that they should charge for that.
So how do they do this without legislation? Because I assume this was not Oh, it's
Oh,
it's
this is in the
part of the
law. This
Inflation
is, yeah.
Reduction Act.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I was at a conference a year and a half ago where the former director of the patent office said that the Inflation Reduction Act is one of the greatest pieces, most significant pieces of patent legislation ever enacted by Congress. For this reason. I mean, price controls on patents have been proposed in Congress since the beginning. I mean, because England has something like that.
Hmm.
The government can dictate and take over patents because they're viewed as gifts bequeathed by the crown. And so what the crown giveth, the crown can take it the way
Yeah. Yeah.
once. So in the United States has always taken the opposite view in its law. And there've always been collectivists and leftists and opposed to, and even libertarians at times opposed to patents and have proposed like, okay, then, these are monopolies and we should control them. And it's always been rejected, but they enacted it.
So why was not a bigger deal made of this at the time? I mean, it was kind of, I don't remember much talk about this aspect of that. There's a lot of talk about the spending, but not much about this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it really was. It was just, well, I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, when it's these massive
Huge.
omnibus,
Yeah.
it's thousands and thousands of pages. God knows what else is in there.
Well, that's the other thing that was passed as an omnibus bill, so they'd only need 51 Senate. So it was a bit.
Yeah.
I thought the whole point of an omnibus bill was it was limited to budgetary issues.
Yeah, well, this is a budgetary issue because it saves the government money by imposing these price controls, because then Medicare and Medicaid isn't. So you can see also, again, a confirmation of the objectivist principle that controls and statism breeds more controls and statism. So, because what was started as, oh, well, a minor quote safety net, as they were saying back in the 60s, becomes the basis for justifying outright explicit price controls. Now, there's 10 lawsuits actually that are proceeding against the government now on the IRA that was brought by drug manufacturers. Also, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has brought a lawsuit, and Pharma, the trade association representing drug innovators, has brought a lawsuit. And they're arguing takings and due process, and they've got and these are some really strong arguments. But the fact that they're having to go through this process, like I said, this has never been done before. And the patent system has been a driver of the U.S. innovation in medicine and biotech. I mean, it's undisputed. I mean, more than almost 60% of all new drugs are, to this day, even with all of our controls, are still invented in the United States. I mean, we are leading the world in medical care innovation, and especially new drugs. And this is just, I mean, as we all know, we've seen it again and again and again. Price controls, government controls kill this. They kill the ability of innovators to create. They kill the ability of capitalistic then deploy in the marketplace, the ability of these new innovations.
So what do you think the chances of these lawsuits succeeding, particularly given the pretty good Supreme Court that we have on certain issues?
Yeah, so if this was in any other area other than patents, I'd be like, I would be fairly confident that the U.S. Supreme Court would probably protect them, because they've been really fantastic in the past, especially the past 2 years on takings issues, and protections of property rights against government takings, government regulations, and eviscerations of property rights. But patents are and intellectual property, thanks to the libertarians, have confused a lot of the justices, and especially Justice Thomas. Justice Thomas has become captured by this kind of classic or now classic libertarian argument that patents are just monopolies. And the other side knows that. And so they exploit that. So they push cases that massively expand, the administrative powers of the government and the regulatory state as patent cases, because they know they can peel Justice Thomas off on those issues then, because then he views them through this lens of patent law and as monopolies, and that therefore the government should restrict them and get rid of them.
Wow, I didn't realize he'd gone that far.
Yeah, he's one of the worst justices right now in the Supreme Court on patents.
Yeah. What's Gorsuch like?
Gorsuch is one of the best.
Yeah,
and I don't just say that because he quoted and cited me once.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, no, he's fantastic. He understands these are property rights, that they're protected as property rights. They are therefore under the Constitution. They deserve the same due process and takings protections and other types of protections of the Constitution. And actually, Gorsuch and Thomas have split. Their case, there are patent cases where Thomas writes the majority opinion and Gorsuch dissents. Because Thomas is going in a bad way. Yeah.
So there's a lot of talk, there has been forever, a lot of talk about drug prices in the United States being so much more expensive than anywhere else in the world. I mean, by orders of magnitude sometimes. In particular, people make a big deal out of insulin. So what's the story, both with drug prices and in particular with insulin?
Yeah. So I fight this issue because it's always also, drug prices are all high and the cause is patents. This is why we have to impose price controls on patents, and there's all these efforts right now at the patent office to try to eliminate patent rights on new drugs. Excuse me. There's also a whole nother area of attempts to impose price controls on patents and drug patents in particular through a regime called the March-in power through this law enacted back in the 1980s called the Bayh-Dole Act, which is a law that actually facilitates patent licensing. And there's a provision that basically says, well, if there's a public emergency or if a drug is not actually being deployed in the marketplace, the government can march in and license that drug. And regulatory agencies have said, aha, see, we can now license drugs for lower prices. And so this is a whole another fight that we're also fighting. Yeah, and it's insane to blame patents for high drug prices. It's insane even if you're not an objectivist and you think that that there shouldn't be any administrative state, because even if you agree with the fact that there is an administrative state, so we should have all these controls on insurance companies, we should have the FDA, we should have all this other, that you think like none of this plays a role in the cost of healthcare and drugs in this country. No, having like restrictions on insurance companies and mandates on insurance companies and having the FDA impose billions of dollars of costs on drug innovators and having to test their drugs and get approval, none of that plays a role and ultimately the pricing of a company in terms of trying to recoup all of their costs. So and then when you layer on top of that all of these the international issue, which is that there's so we are on the unfortunate victims of basically arbitrage by other countries. So we are the last country in the world where drug companies can still price the drug. Well, it may not be any for much longer, but we are right now still the last country in the world where drug companies can price the price of their drug, how they, as a free market price, what you're willing to pay for it and what I'm willing to sell it to you for. We can negotiate that contract. Even with all the regulations and controls, because every other country has a socialized healthcare system, and there the government says this is the price you're going to charge. And that's not free market, and that's not a negotiation. They like to call it a negotiation. By the way, that's the IRA calls it a negotiation. It's the price negotiation by the government.
Wouldn't it be cool if all these drug companies just told these countries no?
Yeah, it would be awesome.
Do you think they just infringe on the IP and steal the drug?
Yeah. And they would, yeah. So they would say, well, we've granted you patents in these countries, and so we're just going to eliminate your patents and we're just going to take it. And what are you going to do? I mean, you can't sue us, can't go after us. And they would be, score you. Oh, you're killing people. They would be, and they don't have the moral certainty or the right ideas to be able to frame it, right? As this is us going on strike. This is us, right? Going on strike against these people who are stealing from us and taking the benefit of the value of our minds, and then trying without acknowledging that we are the creators of this. So all these other countries say, all right, well, we're just going to charge this low price. Knowing full well that that's not the price that the drug company can make up, knowing full well that what the drug company will do will just increase the prices in the United States.
Yep.
Because they're not accountable to U.S. voters in France and Germany and England. They're accountable to the English voters. The English voters are like, yeah, you got us cheaper drugs. You got us free, or free drugs, right? And so this is the other thing too, is that, so the drug companies in the United States are having to make up for all these other price controls that are killing them in all these other countries. So, and when you layer on top of that actually drugs in this country are not that actually high. So when yes, these new drugs that take 10 or 15 or 20 years to create, to go through the FDA testing process, that basically cures hepatitis, that makes diabetes a manageable condition, that makes cancer a survivable condition now. Like, these are the drugs that cost billions of dollars to create and invent after they go, not just to create them, but then to go through the government regulations and controls. And so it's like, yeah, those are really expensive, but like insulin. So to answer your question about insulin, because
insulin's not under patent, right?
Insulin was patented like in 1922 when it was first isolated at the University of Toronto. If you want original insulin, anyone can make that. It's already approved by the FDA. It's so what people want the computer controlled auto injectors with the new, apps, control devices, and the new synthetic insulin that is 90% more, has efficacy than the original, just, pig-based insulin and things of this sort. They want the Ferraris of insulin that have just been invented through the biotech revolution. And yes, those are under patent. And so they what they do is they say, well, those aren't all real innovations. I have literally been at a at a at a at a at a hearing with the International Trade Commission, where there was a representative from a group saying, "Oh, these auto injectors where you just turn the top and stuff like that. That's like my pen." She pulled out a pen. She's like, "I'm turning the top. There's nothing innovative about that." It's like these auto injectors, by the way, they're incredibly complicated technologies, and they have to function 100% of the time. So the quality control on them is through the roof, right? So yeah, a Ford or your refrigerator can break every once in a while.
Yep.
Auto injectors cannot break. They have to work every single time. My daughter has one. She has an AviQ. In fact, AviQs were taken off the market for a few years because precisely this issue. So Sanofi, which is the company that invented the insulin it's used in the AviQ injector, which is this little square, so it's not the big long pen of EpiPen. They licensed a Canadian company to make the auto injector, and that Canadian company had quality control issues, and so the auto injector wasn't working 100% of the time. So Sanofi pulled it off the market, canceled the license, and then they spent the next 3 or 4 years doing everything in-house. And now actually, and to make it easier and cheaper, you call them directly. So you skip the whole insurance process.
Yeah.
So you actually get it, they mail it to you directly. It's much cheaper as a result of that. And it's an incredible device. It actually has it talks you through how to use it.
Oh,
It
wow.
has a chip in it so you don't have to remember all the steps and what to do and everything. And it's an incredible little device as opposed to the EpiPen, which is they're like big. Their tubes are like this long, and you can't really carry them around very easily. And another reason, by the way, and why EpiPens are so expensive, is because like Congress passed a law, I think it was about 20 years ago, where they mandated that there had to be epinephrine used or available in all schools and in any company or institution that receives federal support, which is just basically everyone.
Everybody, yeah.
They have to have a medical kit with an epinephrine auto injector. Well, guess what term they used in the law? Did they call it an epinephrine or did they call it an EpiPen?
I don't know.
They called it an EpiPen.
Okay.
And they said everyone ever receives federal funding has to have an EpiPen. Well, then, and by the way, one of the senators, his daughter was the CEO of EpiPen. So the lawyers representing all of these universities, schools, and sporting institutions read the law and said, we need to buy an EpiPen. We can't buy a not generic. The law tells us we have to buy an EpiPen. And of course, now when the government is mandating that everyone has to buy it, what did EpiPen people do? They're like, okay, we're going to increase our prices because we'll make more money because we got the government to mandate people to buy our product.
They have to buy it no matter what the price is. Yeah.
So you can see how all of this, it's just this intertwined, complex nexus of government regulations, FDA, insurance, and then just freestanding laws and controls. And all of that is explicitly evaded and ignored by people who do know about it. I mean, lawyers and policy makers and activists even, because they blame patents.
So I'm curious about an IP issue. We haven't talked about this. I don't know what your view is or if you thought about it much, but AI is creating a bunch of copyright more than patent issues. Any thoughts on that? I mean, on these, And I know there are a number of lawsuits on the media companies are suing them for using their articles to teach their algorithm. So what should be the status of that in your view?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a great issue. And it's one of the reasons why I love doing intellectual property, because
Yeah.
the foundations of intellectual property are raised as salient, real issues all the time in ways that other areas of law it's not, because it's like, how many times can you make a new wrench?
Yeah.
But so yeah, AI is this is not a flash in the pan fad like NFTs were. NFTs were a fad and they've since fallen by the wayside. But no, AI is real and it's going to be around a long time, and it raises really interesting issues, both in terms of questions of infringement, output questions, as well as even input questions of
Yeah.
like, well, are, for instance, the products of AI patentable or copyrightable? So, um, so when your AI system, uh, produces a work of art, is that a copyrightable work? Is that because it was produced by a AI system, not and it's not a person per se, or even AI has now been used to discover a new antibiotic. They fed into an AI system like all this information on antibiotics and stuff, and it popped out, hey, there's this new antibiotic and everyone's like, oh my God, there's a new antibiotic. And the question is like, okay, who's the inventor of that? Who's the inventor of that antibiotic?
Yeah.
So, and these are really interesting and they're hard questions. And they raise kind of really important issues. And these are the discussions that I love to sit in on with
Sure.
policymakers and lawyers and professors. So on the input side question, I think it's really important to recognize something about AI that a lot of people kind of get caught up in, is that, first of all, AI is not it's not true artificial intelligence,
Yep.
right? Or my joke that I like to say is, until the Terminator applies for a patent, or C3PO, whichever, if you want good or bad, we don't have to worry about AI actually being an inventor. This is a tool. It's a tool. It's a new type of tool. And the most important thing about the US patent system, as opposed to other systems, is we've recognized that the patent system is supposed to secure the products and the tools that are created in each new technological or economic revolution, right? So there weren't, industrial power plants and oil drilling derricks in 1790 when we created our first patent laws. But they wrote the patent law in a very general sense, right? It protects any new manufacture process. They have general categories because they recognize that innovation is the unpredictable. It's what comes next. And the point is, any product of a human mind should be protectable. And the tools we use in creating new products should be protectable as well. So I just filed comments on this with the patent office because they raised this question, well, what should be the status of AI? And my comment essentially summed up as byproducts of AI, like that antibiotic, so the person who actually should have the patent, the property right, is the person who hit the button.
Yep.
They run the AI or prompted it, gave it the prompt. Okay, find me a new, because they knew to put in all the relevant information. It's the creative mind, it's the behind the AI that's using it as a tool. So yeah, it's really complicated, but so were computers in the 1950s and 60s, and so were oil derricks and automobiles in the 1890s, and yet all in typewriters, which were incredibly complex machines in the 19th century. And so AI is just the next complex tool that we've used, that we've created as rational beings to create incredibly new values to live our lives. So now this is really important because the Copyright Office has taken the position that if you use AI to create something, then it's not copyrightable.
Really?
And that's crazy. I mean, that's just a crazy position. And that was kind of what I was saying to the patent office, like, ignore the Copyright Office. They're bonkers. They don't know what they're talking about. You should be protecting these things and identifying who they are, because a lot of people are like, well, why can't the AI get a patent? Why can't we just say this computer program named Davis, this is actually some cases about this, gets the patent? Well, because it's a legal right. It's not just that they control the, you have this entity and then maybe some, because they say like corporations have legal rights and those aren't living beings. So why can't the computer program get it? Well, but a corporation isn't just a holder of rights. It's a holder. It's also has obligations relative to those rights. So it can sue on those rights, but it can be sued as well. So until Davis, the AI computer, can sit in the defendant's table or the plaintiff's table in a lawsuit, right? It can't be the owner of the property itself.
And corporations is just a legal structure for people, right? There are people there. So when you say corporation has rights, not really. I mean, the people who own the corporation have rights. So it's just
people directing the corporation.
Yeah, it's a convenient way. It's a shortcut, but it's not an actual person. Corporations are not people. They just represent people.
Yeah. So this particular issue about whether it's protectable or not is not much in the public mind, but this is a really big debate right now. It's occurring at the Copyright Office, at the Patent Office, among lawyers and policymakers. And it really matters because if we don't secure this next technological revolution with the property rights that are deservedly created and should be secured to the innovators, we're going to undermine and kill this revolution.
No, the lawmakers are too busy wanting to regulate it and prevent Terminator from coming.
Exactly. They're too caught up in all of these sci-fi, fear-mongering scenarios and don't realize that this is no different than when humans invented a pen, then invented a typewriter, and then invented a word processor, and then invented a computer. Each stage, the human is being, I described as that was the analogy I used in my comment. I said, where each stage, the human decision maker is being moved further and further back from the various processes that occur between the human and the ultimate output that is being produced through those processes. And yet, we don't have a problem identifying that these are just all tools, and the AI is the same thing. It's just a new technological tool. But then there's the interesting question, well, especially, and this is more in the copyright space, it'll start occurring in the patent space as well eventually. So what extent then do you have infringement by AI systems? And this is kind of a cool, there's about, I think there's about 40 cases pending right now.
Not surprised.
There's a lot of them, or there have been 40 total. I think some of them have been dismissed, and so this is a really interesting area too, because it also shows you how, just like with common law development, which is where courts develop the law through the development of cases and decisions, and the law evolves in this kind of ground up basis. You had the exact same thing happen here, where the first lawsuits that were filed because they said, and they use the anthropomorphic terms, the ingestion of copyrighted material by the AI system is copyright infringement. And those were very quickly dismissed because they said, well, I mean, but this is no different than someone reading a book on the internet and then using that information to produce something. That's not copyright infringement per se. So, you haven't made the case that this is copyright infringement that's actually happening. And so those cases kept getting kicked out. And so the copyright owners were trying to figure out, well, where's the problem? And the problem isn't the ingestion. The problem is the output, is the byproduct. They're producing either a derivative work, which is a version of the original copyrighted work, which still should be protected. So derivative work would be like a new line of comic book stories based upon an original comic book hero, right? So Superman, but then they create a whole new line of story. Well, we have a movie, Deadpool and Wolverine. That's a derivative work from the original Wolverine and the original Deadpool stories, but Marvel still owns the copyright, and so they get the copyright in that derivative work. Or it reproduces the work in its entirety, and that's the New York Times lawsuit. They said, look, eventually, if you feed the AI system, because they did put into the AI the original works. And so eventually you can prompt it for it to reproduce the original work. And if that's happening, you have a system that's facilitating copyright infringement. And I think and the New York Times lawsuit actually is the lawsuit that actually has the most legs in this respect. It's the one that most people sat up and said, haha. So after like these first 5 or 10 lawsuits were tried and they really were legitimately rejected and
Yeah.
dismissed by courts, they said they figured out what the real problem is here, because they and where the interference with the right of the creators is occurring. Because if they can create the copy through the AI system, then you've got the interfere, then you've got the making of a copy, and that's what copyright is about, is about the protection of.
Hmm.
So as a and all of this should still reflect, this development should still reflect the underlying principle that creators have the right to control their creative works through the copyright system and through the patent system and other intellectual property system, in the same way that a farmer has the right to control the crop that they produce from their farm every single year, year in, year out. And so that's our presumptive starting point. And
Mhm.
our presumptive, and this is really important because the tech community has completely flipped intellectual property on its head, where they think the presumptive starting point should be fair use.
Yeah.
Oh, well, any new technological innovation that allows a new way of using something should be presumptively, free of liability of violations of other people's rights. That is not the principle of what it means to live in a free society that respects individual rights.
Absolutely.
Hmm?
So if somebody trained the AI
Yeah.
all my stuff
Hmm.
and then came out with a Yaron AI, um, would I have a basis for suing them?
Well, that is some of the lawsuits. That's so these are, in fact, in addition to the New York Times lawsuit, there's another really big lawsuit of all of these top authors, very
Yeah.
famous authors, for exactly this. They're saying you basically create this ability for people to recreate derivative works
Yeah.
from my writings. Because you can say, because in fact, what you described exists. Someone could actually say
No,
to
I know.
ChatGPT, write an essay in the format and style of Yaron Brook, and
Yeah.
you'll get one that's pretty good.
So I'm preempting them, and there's a company that's actually going to create a Yaron Brook clone.
Yeah,
They uh they
that's awesome.
I've given them the right to use my voice, my image, and access to my books and to all of my materials, and we'll see what happens. I haven't heard from them in a while, but we'll see what happens. Uh,
Okay. Well, I hope it
it's when the
happens.
clone hallucinates.
Yeah.
It's what I'm really interested. How does Yaron hallucinate?
Yeah, I love all this anthropomorphication we have
Yes.
of these AI
Yeah.
systems which are really just dumb language models, right? They're just,
They're algorithms. I mean,
yeah.
they're statistical
They're
algorithms.
statistical algorithms
Yep.
based in purely what already exists. I mean, so
Yes.
it's not, yeah, so it can't conceptually create something entirely new. This is why people are always like saying to me as a law professor, like, ooh, in what way is AI gonna, really hurt you? And I say, it doesn't hurt us, because
Yeah.
my
Helps you.
standard law school exam is, here's an entire new set of facts that I've created. Tell me the legal answer to it. And so whereas I'm not asking them to regurgitate back to me something that already happened. So where it hurts people, right, is the philosophy professors who are telling their students, write me an essay on Plato's ethics,
Yep.
right? Of course the AI system can do that.
Although
And
Brian Kaplan at George Mason's, he's written some his economics exam,
yeah,
and the AI does really well on his tests.
yeah,
Uh,
undergraduates are really are gonna have to change a lot to
yeah.
accommodate this. Now, I want to mention something else too about giving your example of your Ron Book AI system,
Yeah.
which is the other way that the tech industry is always kind of has a mistake, and it's unfortunate they have this mistake, is that I mentioned earlier, right? Their position is always, well, this is outside the bounds of IP. So their first position is always, oh, well, we can't license this. It's impossible. There's no way that we can accommodate this through commercial transactions and contracts and things because this changes everything. It's too
Yep.
hard. Google did this with Google Books. Google's whole position was, it's impossible for us to license all of these books. This is why we just had to they literally
Steal them
deliberately,
all.
explicitly created this. We're copying books, wholesale copyright infringement. And their justification was, it was impossible for us to license. It was like, well, then you shouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
But actually, the reality was you could do it, because this is why there are all of these trade associations. This is why there's an entire organization called the Authors Guild, which represents all of the authors. And this is why there's all of these licensing associations and organizations. And this is why in patents, we have this something called patent pools that serve the same function, which group together, bring together all of the disparate owners to say, okay, this reduces transaction costs. Here's your easy one-stop go-to source. In fact, we have this in copyright. It's called ASCAP and BMI for the licensing of songs and music. In bars, every bar. So if you ever go to a bar and they're playing music, look, they have a little ASCAP or BMI sticker somewhere, because they have to show that, because that's where they're getting their license from. Those are those are organizations that pool together all the different copyright owners. That a bar, that mom and pop bar, could easily just take, like, okay, off the shelf, this is at the top, this is what I want to do with music, here's what I pay for it. That will happen eventually too with the AI, with I think on the ingestion side and the output side. But it won't happen as long as the guy who does ChatGPT is going around going, oh, it can't be done, and this has to be fair use.
Yeah, Sam Altman.
Sam Altman, yeah.
Sadly, a lot of these Silicon Valley, I mean, as great of an entrepreneurs as they are, they're coming from everything from a very egalitarian perspective, or very anti-capitalist perspective, unfortunately.
Yeah. By the way, we don't think many people won't remember this anymore, but it was the exact same argument with MP3s and file sharing.
Oh yeah, you can do it. You have to steal it, right?
Have to steal it. We can't license this. We can't do any of this until Steve
Jobs
Jobs actually did it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then
absolutely, people forget that he saved the music industry and made music sharing legal. I mean, in a way that nobody imagined at the time. Yeah.
And he also did it thanks to also a very important law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which extended copyright protections to technological protection measures. So he was able to say to Sony and BMI, Universal, you can trust me. We will protect your music so that it won't be copied and shared around the entire internet.
So is there any hope for a kind of semi-rational copyright or IP protection bill out of Congress with regard to AI, or is Congress so dysfunctional these days that nothing good can come out of it?
Yeah, as a general rule of thumb, I'm always like, nothing good can come out of Congress, right? But every once in a while they do something good.
It's getting better, it seems.
Yeah. And they may not need a special AI. Like, they didn't need a special AI or a special bill to accommodate the copyright infringement that was occurring by Napster and Grokster and all of these peer-to-peer file swapping services. There were just a couple court decisions that just essentially said, look, this is a copyright infringement. And if you want to do it, you got a license. And then they did. Napster was reborn as a licensed pay for service MP3 listening service after that. So so they may not need special legislation. And again, that's been in a general sense, they shouldn't have to, right? Because that's the beauty of having a properly structured intellectual property system, in the same way that when we have new types of property rights come into existence in factories and things of that sort, they don't have to say, oh, well, we need whole new property laws to govern what a factory is as opposed to what a farm is. No, a property right is the right of exclusive control. And, Ayn Rand's definition, the right to acquire, use, and dispose of material values. And notice that definition will cover AI and just as much as it covers a wrench, just as much as it covers a farm, as it should.
But once in a while, we do get legislation that is helpful.
Yes.
Would that be right?
Yes. Like, well, I mentioned like the DMCA, which had to identify that we're going to, that the creation of digital protection measures needed their own protection. So the hacking of these digital protection measures which wasn't itself a copyright violation, had to be made an act of liability, because that's what then could protect the underlying copyrighted work. So if someone comes up with some type of, digital system for watermarking works that go through the AI system or something like that, and that might need special protection because it may not be covered exactly under copyright definition, what counts as a copyright work as opposed to what doesn't. They might need to do something like that. Yeah.
So I'm trying to end on a positive note. So I had Steve Simpson here a couple of weeks ago, and he had a very positive assessment, I think, generally, with some caveats, obviously, of the current Supreme Court, and particularly this last term. I mean, you got some worries about IP, particularly with Thomas. But what is your sense of this Supreme Court as compared to others, in particularly when it comes to our economic freedoms?
Yeah, yes, especially when it comes to economic freedoms and protection of property rights, and the uh, development finally, long last, of restrictions on the administrative state, this kind of
Yeah.
unconstitutional fourth branch of government. Um, yeah, it was a really significant term. I mean, a whole series of good decisions. I mean, not perfect, not great, but that's, they have to go incrementally. I mean, we're not going to get the entire administrative state's unconstitutional. It's all being thrown out. They're not going to do that, and they couldn't do that.
Yeah.
But
We could dream, can't we?
we can dream, but the dream drives each of these cases that
Sure.
slowly builds up to the overturning of all of the bad precedents and all of the bad doctrines that have accumulated over the past 80 years, and especially over the past 40 years. So you had Loper Bright, which to everyone's surprise, because I didn't think they would do this, was overruled Chevron doctrine,
Mhm.
which this doctrine that courts defer to agencies on questions of statutory interpretation. There's a lot of misinterpretations. I think it's about the actual expertise of the agency and what the agency is doing in terms of its factual expertise. No, it's about whether the agency actually has authority in the statute that creates the agency to do what it's doing. And, so it's about the statute and what the statute means and says, and that's always been the domain of courts. And, when Chevron was created in 1987, it corresponds with, since then, this massive growth in the administrative state that,
Yep.
I mean, it's massive in the United States. It was possible before the late 80s. And, Yaron, you know this, and I know this because we were alive back then, that you could go through your life without having any significant interactions or any interactions at all with any particular federal agency in the federal government.
Yep.
I mean, there were entire people who lived their entire lives without having any. That is now impossible. There is not a single person who lives their lives in the United States anymore who doesn't have some type of interaction with multiple federal agencies that have control over our lives. And this is because they were given this carte blanche power to do whatever they wanted to do. So it really.
Well, and Congress started writing laws that were so open-ended
Mhm.
and just left it to the regulators to fill in the blanks. And
Yeah.
Dodd-Frank was probably the worst of those, but there were several others.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, and by the way, and it's not just Loper Bright. There were a lot of other decisions that Steve May talked about. The Jarkissi decision, involving you're right under the Seventh Amendment to a jury trial, when you're accused of something that requires you to pay money as a result of a violating of some type of law or someone's rights. So, but the real issue in Jarkissi was, does the administrative agency basically get to say, this isn't an issue that falls normally within the domain of the courts, because we as an agency get to define it as an agency issue, and therefore we get to decide it as the judge in our own administrative courts.
Yep.
And when you appeal it, you appeal to us, the agency officials. I mean, and it took that question away from them and said, no, you can't do that. They've been doing that for years. And it said, you can't do that anymore. You're not allowed. If you're actually fining someone, that creates a payment of money damages, and that activates the Seventh Amendment right to a jury trial that puts someone in court where you get due process and a neutral judge. There was the Cornerstone decision, really important decision. Again, these are things that weren't in the newspapers that much.
Mhm.
This was a decision about, whether you can challenge regulations that have been enacted long after they've been enacted.
Yeah, so that was one of the last ones that came out. Yeah, that
Yeah,
was really good.
really important one where agencies had for years been basically saying, yeah, well, we created this rule that says you have like 90 days to challenge a regulation, and if and we don't care that you weren't even in existence. That was in this case, it would involve a check exchange regulation involving an exchange fee that was paid for the use of credit cards. Cornerstone was created. This exchange fee regulation was created in 2011. Cornerstone didn't even come into existence until 2018, and so they couldn't have challenged it.
Yep.
And the agency position was, sucks to be you. You've got to pay it. and you can't challenge it. And the court said, no, they said this is a statute of limitation. So it's about when the harm is accrues to the person that's trying to challenge it.
Yeah.
And so again, a really important, restriction kind of procedurally. These are kind of more broadly what lawyers think of when we think of the abstraction of due process and even just general rule of law norms. That there are been incredible restrictions that have been brought to bear now under the Constitution through due process and rule of law and takings clause protections on the administrative state, especially this in the past several decisions of the court that will redound to the benefit of our country significantly and to individual.
Yeah, I mean, it's the one semi-rational part of our government.
Yeah,
by far better than the other two branches, unfortunately.
And that's why, we're right back to 1937 with FDR, wanting to pack the court and get rid of the judges who were saying you're violating the Constitution. You can't adopt all these regulatory agencies and all of these controls and everything they were doing through the New Deal.
Tell us a little bit about what Biden is proposing right now.
Yeah, so Biden is continuing. So it's not Biden, as we all know. And by the way, any of us who have been following this have been watching his press conference and stuff for years know that the guy has had some type of dementia or some type of.
Yep. I mean, he wasn't that sharp to begin with. Let's be clear. I remember him 20 years ago, mumbling and talking nonsense. So
and also like all these people who are like, oh, he was such an honorable man and stuff. No, he wasn't. He has been a hallmark of just the worst type of politician. This is the man who people have forgotten this. He dropped out of the 1988 presidential election because he was caught plagiarizing his campaign speech.
That's right.
Because one of the people he actually ended up plagiarizing was Abraham Lincoln. It's like,
no, he's a joke. He's a joke. And
this is the guy who he used to hold Amtrak trains. He used to call when he was running late from the Senate building. He would call Amtrak and say, "I'm Senator Biden, and you have to hold the train for me." And so there were people who were missing business meetings because of him, who were not getting, So he's just a lot. Yeah. So he's not a good man. So really the people running this country, and this has been kind of an open secret in DC, it's been a melange of former Obama staffers, but it's also been what a lot of people don't seem to be aware of. It's been a lot of the Warren and Sanders staffers, especially from the 2020 election, which explains a lot of the hardcore leftist shifts and legislation and enactments that he's done in the past 4 years in his administration, because they've been really running the show. And this is his continued this is their continued proposals, because they've been wanting to do this. Of course their goal would be to pack the court. So their goal would actually be for Congress to pass a law that says we get to add in 3 more justices in the court. And it's exactly what FDR proposed. That was rejected back in 1937. But they didn't go that far, although that's clearly still on their radar screen. So he proposed term limits, which, by the way, he can't, at least through legislation. That has to be a constitutional amendment, because the Article 3 says the justices shall serve in good behavior, which means that's like tenure. I mean, you can't. So it's in the Constitution that they have appointments for life. He also wants to impose a code of ethics on the Supreme Court. And again, there's some questions about separation of powers there and whether the Congress actually has the authority to do that. But even if they do, like, it's like Congress, really, code of ethics. Like these are the people who are engaging in like insider trading, before they
Oh, yeah.
release a law, they buy and sell stock.
Yeah.
So it's just like really a pot calling the kettle black here. So they're wrapping themselves in some type of like, well, we're like honorable and I'm Senator White House and I'm untouchable, but I think what they're doing is bad. It's just so the whole thing stinks from high hell. I mean, it's politicization of this institution of law, which has been really important. And Biden actually, one of his criticisms of the court in his announcement of his proposal was, we're the only country that that has judges on our Supreme Court that sit for life. Well, that's because the founders weren't believers in democracy.
Yeah.
And they were believers in the protection of rights and of limited government, and that judges should not be accountable to the people. They're accountable to the Constitution and to the function of the Constitution as an instrument that secures the rights of individuals.
What do you think about age restrictions on the court?
Hmm?
What do you think about an age limit on the court? Just seeing how many people I know get into their 80s and they just decline pretty fast cognitively. And how do we prevent that at the court level?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting question, and it's it's something that lawyers kind of talk about. We know about that some justices decline, like Justice Ginsburg was openly very much declining in her final years. But the problem is that how would you structure a law or restriction that would appropriately accommodate that concern without actually also going too far and actually potentially, eliminating good aspects of people in the court, because there are people in the court who are well into their 80s and 90s and are incredibly sharp and are incredibly, retain their minds. It is really interesting, actually. It's kind of the Supreme Court is kind of an exemplar of Ayn Rand's insight about, our minds are our basic means of survival. And if you stay active in your mind, that you will do very well throughout your life, because the Supreme Court justices live very long lives and they're intellectually active and engaged very much, very well into their 80s and 90s sometimes. So, yeah, like I wouldn't want to deprive the court
there
of
has to be
justice.
something. If you get somebody who's really senile, how do you get rid of them? Can you impeach a judge?
Yes. Oh,
I guess you
yeah.
can
So
impeach
that's
it.
the other thing too. It's not like they don't have controls over this.
Okay. Okay.
So
That's
there's yes,
Yeah.
an impeachment can be like you're incompetent.
Okay.
By the way, I think there's a strong argument that Biden should be
Oh no,
should be
I mean,
impeached.
obviously
Or
he's not been with us for a long time. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
I
there's
mean,
there's
like,
an argument there on that basis, not on the stupid stuff that
yeah, yeah.
Congress focuses on. Focus on what matters.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, they can bring articles of impeachment against it. In fact, judges are impeached all the time. People don't lower court judges, not justices,
okay.
for all sorts of things. Oftentimes, improprieties, sexual harassment and things. Not even actually being like charged with sexual harassment, but sufficient enough evidence that there's been sexual harassment. There was one judge in Texas who a trial court judge who was impeached in the 90s. Late 90s, on those grounds that he was sexually harassing and abusive of his court personnel and stuff of that sort. So you don't have to, and he was never charged. So you don't have to be charged with a crime. You don't have to actually be committing a high crime and misdemeanor to be impeached as a judge. And so it's it is a control that Congress does have control here. I mean, they do have the checks. I'm more worried about the deleterious effects of
Putting limits.
putting limits and it's the camel nose in the tent. Once you concede to this initial political check on the court for which is clearly being done for political purposes, then there's going to be constant pressure to continue to quote tinker with the court and how it functions, to the point where it's just going to be completely destroyed as a court of law.
All right, let's take some questions. Let's see. So Dave says, I started a staging company using foldable cardboard furniture and was able to get a patent on the way the cardboard folds on itself, in on itself. IP protection are an incentive to innovate, not a deterrent.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I talk about and I still do on my Twitter account is, anniversaries of patents issuing.
Yep.
And the Raggedy Ann doll was patented. The Monopoly board game was patented. These are any new creation of a value is rightly, if it's new and meets the other legal requirements for getting a patent, should be protected as a property right to the person who created it.
Is it true that Elon Musk kind of prides himself on not getting patents?
Yes. Yes. So he's kind of caught up. Well, no, actually, yeah, that's not true. Actually, I misheard you. He prides himself on being anti-patent,
Yeah.
but they do get patents. Now and he uses patent doctrines to his benefit. But he's ideologically, he's been caught up in this kind of libertarian, false sense of that, oh, patents are just monopolies. He likes to say, oh, patents are the weak, and things of the sort. When, he doesn't and because, by the way, because he has a business model that doesn't necessarily rely on patents per se. But there are business models that rely on patents, that you can't function without the type of property right protections that are secured through the patent system. Pharmaceutical innovation is one of them. But even in the high-tech space, because they always love to say, you don't need patents in high-tech. Enterprise software development, that's all patented. And it's deployed through licensing. And then in the mobile revolution, the companies that create the 4G, 5G, 6G, and other types of communication technologies, they all had licensing business models. So because they're invention factories, just like Thomas Edison's invention factory back in the late 19th century. So they require patents to license to make their revenue, in order to fund their R&D to create the next generation of new kind of communications technology. So you do need patents, and it's unfortunate that Elon Musk is kind of caught up in this both ideology and is mistaken by his own business model that doesn't necessarily require them.
Hard to tell who captures Elon Musk's ideology. I mean, he seems to shift all over the place. Let's see.
He's mercurial. Yeah.
Liam writes, Israeli society strikes me as very socialist and anti-business. Businesses are given just enough freedom to produce so they can be plundered. They don't have a chamber of commerce or any concept of heroic entrepreneur. I mean, I'm happy to answer this one.
Well, you can.
It's just not true. I mean, Israel has strong elements of socialism that relate back to its founding into the first 30, 35 years of its existence. But the heroic entrepreneur is definitely a modern thing in Israel. I mean, the startup tech, high-tech guy who starts with nothing and becomes a billionaire is definitely recognized as a model in Israel. People try to emulate it. They're celebs. There was this company just recently that didn't sell to Google for, what was it, $23 billion, something, $30 billion, four guys. And they're going to go public, and they'll probably make just as much money, if not more. But Google did offer them multiple billions. So no, I don't know about the Chamber of Commerce, but the heroic entrepreneur, I definitely think, is a concept that exists in modern Israel. It didn't exist when I was growing up, because when I was growing up, Israel was truly socialist ideologically and in practice, but that's gone. It hasn't gone in practice in a sense that, unfortunately, the Israeli governments have not liberated the economy the way they should have. And it's one of probably the biggest, I don't know what you think about this, but probably the biggest threat to Israel's existence is that it's not rich enough, right? Somebody asked me, what would you do to defend Israel? I said, the best thing Israel can do to defend itself is get rich quickly, because particularly since I don't think they can rely on the U.S. long-term, I don't think they can rely on Europe long-term. They need to make money. And the way to do that is to liberalize the economy, and they haven't. But it's a far cry from the socialism of the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, if I can just add a little bit to that,
Yeah.
because you're I agree with everything that Yaron said. I mean, I mean, first of all, yeah, I mean, Israel is a mixed economy. It's a mixed country. It has, has bad elements and good elements. But if you've been to Israel or if you know of Israel, like it could not be what you describe in your question. Israel could not be the successful country that it is if that was true.
Yep.
Of what you said is true, that they don't admire her, innovators and creators and things of this sort. And by the way, I saw this firsthand through the Atlas Juniors program run by
Yep.
Boaz and Alina, which we visited on our mission, in part because I proposed that as an important thing for us to do. And their biotech and high tech is really impressive. NVIDIA is an Israeli company, and right now they're one of the highest valued companies. And isn't NVIDIA an Israeli
No,
company?
I don't think it's Israeli, although they have offices, I think, in Israel.
Oh, I thought it was it was like it was or like half Israeli or something. But and and
Could-
Teva and Teva is an Israeli company. I know that.
Huge
Yeah,
pharmaceutical,
and
particularly in, yeah.
so this, I mean, it's so, and the fact that they don't have a chamber of commerce is just a trade association for representing business persons. And so,
Doesn't mean anything.
yeah, I mean, I would never hold that against a country that didn't have a chamber of commerce.
No,
But
Israel has more entrepreneurs per capita
yeah.
than any place outside of Silicon Valley. It
Mhm.
has more tech, innovation, more IP, patents, and stuff like that than pretty much anywhere else per capita in the world. Um,
Mhm.
it is massive innovation. I mean, almost everything that you use, if you use electronics,
That's something.
has IP from Israel in it.
Yep.
Almost
Yeah.
everything. I think laser printing was invented in Israel. I mean, it's just there's very little that we have that is not. People who want to boycott Israeli products would have to give up their PCs, give up most of their modern,
Drugs.
yeah, drugs and ways they live. I mean, yeah, healthcare is very innovative in Israel in spite of
Yeah.
socialization. Biotech is huge in Israel. So yeah, people, it's one of the most entrepreneurial and entrepreneur loving cultures in the world right now.
And another example of another indirect example of this is, I think per capita, the only country that has most objectivists outside the United States is Israel.
Might have more objectivists than
Yeah,
that.
right. Actually, per capita, actually, it might be more. I
Yeah.
might be wrong.
Particularly
I
if you
mean,
count us former Israelis,
yeah.
right? Right, really. Yeah. All right. Clark asks, what happens in today's world if a patent is violated? Does it take years for the courts to do anything about it? Is intellectual property still taken seriously by our statist intellectual overlords?
Well, that's a great question. Um, so uh yeah, so uh, um we have a problem right now in the United States. We have seriously undermined and destabilized patents and to some degree copyrights as a property right system that protects and secures new innovations, and serves as a basis for deploying, commercializing these innovations in the marketplace through licensing and other types of commercial activities as property rights, because that's what property rights do. And that was the United States. Actually, that was our innovative contribution to patent systems. We were the first country that said these are property rights, and they can do with them as anyone else does with property rights. Um, and um, and over the past 15 years, 20 years now, we've, through a series of Supreme Court decisions, through a series of laws passed by Congress, we've really undermined and made it much harder to get patents, to license them, to retain them. They're more easily invalidated through willy-nilly administrative processes, through an agency at the Patent Office that goes by the acronym PTAB, like all agencies do. It's the Patent Trial and Appeal Board. And also some of what you describe is also just a byproduct of the fact that, civil litigation in our country has been completely undermined through non-objective laws and just the breaking down of processes. So all cases take forever to go through courts now, unfortunately. So that's not unique to patents. That's not unique specifically to patents, but but the patents have their own kind of problems in this space because of this. And because of all of this, you have this practice now. It's called predatory infringement, where large companies And they're almost all the high tech companies like Google and Facebook basically say, I'm taking your patent and there's nothing you can do. If you want to sue me, go ahead. I'll invalidate. I'll drag you through 5 or 10 years of court and I'll invalidate your patent. I'm going to file 50 petitions against you to invalidate your patent at the PTAB at the patent office. And so you don't want, and you're going to end up paying millions of dollars and get nothing. So you go away and just be thankful that we don't do any of this, and you can still have that little piece of paper that says you have a patent. And this is what happened. And by the way, how did they get that invention? Well, they entered into an initial licensing negotiation with you to use that as a means by which to find out about your technology. And so there's some really famous cases involving Massimo, with Google taking Massimo's Apple taking Massimo and invented the pulsometer that's used in the iWatch.
Yep.
And there's several other really prominent cases, but they represent a whole, it's like the tip of an iceberg. There's a whole practice of this that's been occurring, and it's a real problem. And I've been part of some of the reform discussions about this in terms of trying to support and bring and supporting laws that have been introduced in Congress to bring back kind of these more stable property rights that patents have served as drivers of innovation in this country.
So would that be new legislation?
It would be. And so that's an example of where the exception proves the rule. So there's a bill that would, that would restrain and restrict the PTAB, imposing some basic rule of law requirements on that agency to function more like a court, which it's not. It's been acting like an out of control agency, to make it harder to invalidate patents, and also to bring back some of the other rights, because one of the functions of, for instance, litigation is not to litigate. So, the last thing you want to do is spend money on a lawyer through litigation. So very often and this is true not just of patent owners, this is true of everyone. So someone's coming on your property, you threaten to sue them, but you don't want to sue them. Why do you threaten to sue them? Because you're telling them, if you want to come on my property, you have to give my permission. Let's have a discussion. How much is it worth to you to come onto my property? How much is it worth to you to pay me? And by the way, I really value my privacy, so you're gonna have to pay me a lot of money. And if you don't want to pay that, get off, right? So it's that ability to get what in the law we call an injunction. And the injunction is the backstop, the ability of any property owner to say, no, you can only use my property in my terms, and we negotiate a contract if you want to use it, because otherwise you can't access my property. And so patent owners need that injunction for the same reason all other property owners do. And they lost that right in the Supreme Court in 2006, the bad Supreme Court decision that I have been working very hard at trying to bring back some reform on, and fix, because this is what usually happens. The person sends the letter, the company knows if they do sue me, they're going to get the injunction, so I should negotiate with them.
So IP Man asks, Adam, you inspired me to go into IP law.
Oh,
You inspired me to incorporate objectivist ideas into my life.
Oh,
good. Thank you both. I am much better off because of you. Question, Adam, how would you think the IP profession is going to evolve with all the advances in LLM? So this is a AI.
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, so the AI can be lawyers, like I said, because being law is engaging in this kind of creative thinking. Okay, we have a new situation, because if it's not new, if the facts of our interaction are the exact same facts of a prior case, it ends like that. Because you go to a lawyer and the lawyer says, you don't want to pay me $10,000. We already know the answer. You're in trouble, pay the person, or the other person's in trouble, show them this decision and you'll win. And this is actually, in most interactions with lawyers involve that actual interaction, because, so the interactions we see are the new interactions. The interactions that actually go through the trial process and the court decisions are the new interactions. And those are the creative applications of the human mind in the rational process through kind of figuring out how do you apply principles to new facts. And AI can't do that. AI just it only knows what occurred before. It's an algorithm that just adds up existing facts. It doesn't, quote, think. And at a certain level, lawyers are still going to be needed, and especially in IP, because especially as all these new AI products and processes need to be protected, and or you sue on the new and interesting ways that they're being infringed, or in the new and interesting ways they're being licensed. So what we call transactional lawyers, which is because these are property rights. The point of them is to make money and to produce new products and services. But like legal assistants and legal secretaries and those other types of jobs, those probably will eventually be replaced. Those will be replaced by AI systems that will be doing those types of jobs. And that's good, because then that frees up those types of people to do other things.
Sure.
And that's the story of technological evolution and economic growth in the past 200 years.
So Spark says, hello, Adam. It's nice to see I'm not the only objectivist Ducatista
Ah,
in the
he
world.
he rides a Ducati.
What do you love about motorcycling? I
uh,
didn't know you were into motorcycles.
you don't know, I've ridden motorcycles for 30 years. I have
I don't
three.
know that.
Yeah, I have two Ducatis and a dirt bike.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. I did a race. I did a motorcycle racing camp last summer, and that was awesome.
Cool.
I was
Cool.
on track. Yeah. I love riding motorcycles.
Too dangerous for me.
Yeah, well, I wear all the gear. It is dangerous, and that's why I wear a full face helmet and the armor jacket and pants, boots. I'm
Mhm.
eventually going to they have these new airbag technologies for
Oh,
vests
wow.
that inflate. Yeah. I had a friend my friend who I ride with, he had a really good friend, got hit head on by a semi truck, and went over the hood and went through the window. He had the airbag technology. He just sprained his thumb. It was his only injury. I mean, so
Great.
yeah, definitely getting that at some point. So you gotta treat it with respect. But you know, it's for people who ride motorcycles, it's hard. It's a little bit hard to describe to people who don't ride motorcycles. So my fellow Decatista understands the true sense of kind of Farfignugan that you get when you're riding a bike. It's because it's truly a melding of the body with the machine in a way that you don't have in a car, where you're just kind of sitting
Mhm.
there and turning a wheel and things of this sort. You are on. One of the things I love about riding motorcycles is you are on intellectually 100%, hyper focused on their speed, angle of lean, the cars around you, road conditions, and you get into this zone of this at one point of just kind of like this perfect melding of this activity. And a lot of people who ride motorcycles, we describe it as therapy almost. It's like
Hmm.
therapy. It also just kind of calms you. It's just a feeling that you can't get doing anything else. That's one of the things I really love about it. I love working on my bikes, and I can do it. I don't have much time to do it, but it's the fun thing to do is to
That's
mechanically
great.
on them.
Mary Eileen says, why can't old people, I am one, she says,
Marilyn, you're not that
understand
old.
that price controls on drugs are very likely to kill them, just like any government involvement in medicine kills people? Is it too abstract? What is it about price control that makes it difficult for people to understand the harm?
Um, I, there are two issues. One is conceptual and one is moral. The concept, because this is the problem. Because don't think of this from the perspective of price controls on drugs. Think of this as why is it a hard time explaining why rent controls are a problem?
Yep.
It's the exact same problem. It's one is that, either you have to think abstractly about, like, okay, the person has a property right. That means they can control what they do. And that means they have the right to determine in a free market, how they sell it. And it's in their interest that they work to, win-win solutions with people. They're not going to ask for $10 bazillion with their pinky in their mouth. That's why you reach these market prices for things that are capable, that reflect the value that they're offering and the value that the customers are willing to provide to them. But also morally, right? If you think, well, they need housing and they
Yep.
can't get housing because apartments are just too darn expensive. The rent is too damn high. There was a political politician in New York who ran on that platform. That was his entire platform. Yaron probably remembers him because it was about 20 years ago. But then, if you think that's your starting moral premise, you have a really hard time saying no to price controls. In fact, you can't say no to price controls because price controls have to be implemented because there are people who have needs that are being denied given the existence of prices that they can't afford. The need creates the moral claim, the moral right, the moral demand that has to be recognized and enforced. And so that's why we have rent control, and that's why we're going to probably end up with price controls on drugs,
Yep.
unfortunately.
By the way, NVIDIA is not an Israeli company, but they do have 4,000 employees in Israel.
Okay, it has a huge presence in Israel. Yeah.
Huge presence in Israel, like all the high tech companies, and it keeps buying Israeli AI companies. Just bought one for $700 million. But yeah, it has a huge presence.
I mean, this is what makes Israel so interesting, is because it really I mean, Yaron, you can confirm this for what I'm about to say, if I'm wrong or right, it's a country that reflects kind of all of the tensions in their most purest form in Western civilization, the religion, but the embrace of freedom and reason and the original socialism, but then the shift to free markets and because Jews have this tension in them. They value reason and success in this world and happiness, but yet they're still religious.
Can't give it up. They can't give up the tribe. So yeah, you're seeing it right now. I mean, Israel's fighting these wars, and yet the real threat to Israel is the internal dissent. I mean, what's going on right now politically in Israel is just unbelievable how destructive it is inside Israel. And a lot of it's about religion. A lot of it's about these religious political parties that are kind of nuts.
Yeah.
What religion does to you. James asked, is it really the case that Houston has no zoning laws? The city of Houston enforces deed restrictions and other controls on developers.
Yes, 100% true.
It is definitely true. And if you go to Houston, you'll see it, because it doesn't look like a zoned city, for better and worse in some cases, but mostly for better, because I mean, it's a really cheap place to live, fastest growing city in America, I think. And yet real estate prices don't go up as much because they just build more supply.
Well, and also, as the questioner says, right, they enforce it through deed restrictions, right? So these are the homeowners associations that people who own homes know about. Those are entirely valid. These are contracts that are put into deeds and become part of the deeds. That are the agreement. Like, okay, I'm not going to build an apartment building in my land. You don't build an apartment building on your land either. We will each have single family homes in this neighborhood, in this group, in this area, until we decide otherwise, because it's a free contract. So the whole neighborhood can get together and can throw out the restricted covenants. They're called covenants. I teach these when I teach property law.
What do you think about them as is the fact that they have no end date? Usually a contract is for a particular period of time, and these are not. Is that an issue?
No, in fact, well, so first of all, some of them do. So some homeowner associations do have end dates to their restricted covenants. But most don't. But that's not a problem, because first of all, there are tons of open-ended contracts, in all sorts of shape and form and content. In fact, it's a whole field of contract law called incomplete contracting. So at what point does an incomplete contract, which is kind of open, become not really a contract? Because how much do you have to agree and not agree, but you have enough agreement that's gone. But the reason why it's not a problem with HOAs and restricted covenants is because it is a requirement in every restricted covenant in an HOA that the parties have to be able to contract out of the restrictions. So every HOA agreement has, all right, if 2/3 of the neighborhood gets together and says, we're done, we don't want this anymore, it all ends. It completely ends. We have that in fact, we just had a huge fight with one of the people in my HOA. We have a 8-house HOA, a single street, and one of our neighbors just chose to be kind of obnoxious and problematic, and was, and we had to show this person that no, the rules apply to you because we have this 2/3 requirement for the elimination of our restricted covenants. Yeah. And also, not just that, there's all these sorts of doctrines that allow for the elimination of the restricted covenants. So for instance, if the HOA isn't enforcing them and is allowing parties to violate them, then there's all of these, they're called equitable doctrines in the law, called estoppel. You may have heard these laches, you sit on your rights, or estoppels when someone does something and you don't stop them. And then so they take that as your agreement, and then now they're acting in a way that could harm them if you then step in later and say, oh, actually, I've changed my mind. You need to stop. You're stopped from doing that. And these all apply to restricted covenants. And I teach these doctrines too. In fact, I spend most of my time teaching these doctrines when I teach restricted covenants, because these are the issues where you get all these interesting questions and conflicts that arise. So they're not permanent, and they don't run to infinity and beyond automatically.
So Ryan says, just got here. Hi, Adam. I notice most people love owning stuff, but have no problem stealing IP from others.
Yeah.
Why is it so hard to make an equivalence between physical property and IP? I think schools should teach this.
Yeah. Well, I've wrestled with this for a very long time and trying to explain intellectual property to lots of different people. And there's no single cause for this. So, it's tempting to say, it's all this one issue. And if we could just teach this one issue, it's all A is A. If we could just teach that. Rationalism, if it only was true.
If only.
But I think one of the problems that runs throughout all the different ones is a failure to understand what is property. That people think they conflate property with possession, with physical things. They think property is the thing. It's the rock you own, it's your bike you own, it's the computer you own. And people don't understand that actually property is an abstraction. And property rights are the abstract rights that you have, the freedom you have to choose how to control certain things. And this is something that I teach in my first year property class. In fact, my first week or two of teaching property in my first year of law school for my students is teaching this point that property is not the thing, it's the rights in the thing. And that thing doesn't have to be a physical thing. Because values are anything that one chooses to pursue, and to create, that one creates, pursues, and keeps. So you can have things like goodwill, which is the value in your corporation, that is created through you selling products and services in the marketplace that people then affiliate with your company. Now you can say, well, then how do you protect the goodwill? You do have to protect the abstraction through something physical. And we do that through something called a trademark. So what trademarks protect is the goodwill. Because that's what someone is stealing because you could say, well, how are they harming you when they make another sneaker with the swoosh symbol on it? How does that harm Nike? Well, because there's an association, a value that Nike has created, a real world value. And that is secured in the law as a property interest that's called goodwill. It's a weird term for it, but that's just our term for it. And so the property rights are ultimately key to material things in the world. So patents don't protect ideas, they protect the physical copies of inventions or new created processes in the world. Copyright doesn't protect the idea of a novel, it protects the copies of the novel. So it is key to something physical in the world, but it's the rights of control over those physical things. And I think if people better understood that point, then I think they would recognize that property isn't just this physical stuff. It also is all of the so-called, quote, intangible things. And this is the awesome brilliance of Ayn Rand. she, her essay, Patents and Copyrights, she says in a couple sentences what took me years to work out in my scholarship and research and writing, which, where she says, patents protect, the fruit, the products of the rational mind. And that she recognized, this is why she recognized patents as property rights par excellence, because they are the implementation of the base of all property rights, as she says, the human's the rational mind, and the ability of the rational mind, and the necessity of the rational mind to produce the values that we need to survive.
Yeah, and it's super. It is those super abstract, and that makes it difficult for people.
Yeah.
They don't get that point about property, and they don't get the point about rights. They don't understand what rights are.
Yeah.
We got to get people thinking. That's step one.
I mean, another very quickly before you
Yeah.
so very oftentimes you hear like, well, land is property, and that's like, well, when I teach property, actually, what I start with is not land. I start with animals, and personal goods, because actually historically that's actually how were some of the first property rights, not land but personal goods, and then I teach property rights in water. In rivers and in lakes, which are called riparian rights, and one of the reasons why I do that is to challenge these students in thinking that land is the paradigm by which we need to understand property. Land is just one type of property.
Yep.
Because it's all the same thing. It's all just property, the right to control some type of value, material value in the world.
Yep. Maximus, he says, the past does not dictate the future. What makes you think it will create more jobs if I assume this is AI, if we start to see that it takes more jobs away, won't some form of socialism arise?
Well, that same argument has been used at every technological revolution. That argument was used in the 19th century. The machines in the factories are taking the jobs of the workers away. We need socialism. In fact, a lot of the drivers of socialist, Marx and others, were using machines. Oh, the workers are being put out by these, rapacious capitalists. Then came the early, some of the early tech revolution, the computer revolutions starting in the 50s and 60s. This is taking jobs and it's putting people out of work. It's, by the way, the term computer, actually, I don't even know, that was a job title. That was actually a job title for the people who checked the long tables of numbers that were used for navigation by ships. So ships' captains had these books, massive books of all of these tables of numbers for when they would look through the sextant, and they would have to compute exactly where they were. And they had and the people who wrote these books, who copied all the numbers down and double checked them, were called computers.
Yep.
This is why they use the term computer, because this is some of the first uses of computers, was just to recreate numbers and to do easy computational mathematical computations. And what you've seen is, so some jobs are displaced, some jobs are replaced by technologies, certainly, but the new technologies create so much more massive new jobs because they're creating new values, and the new values that are deployed in all of these new ways that were unforeseen before, and people couldn't think about how to do it. And so, like, an example of this is, just to take an easy example, is Musk's, reusable rocket technology, right? Look at all the massive new jobs that created. You could say, well, he's put out of work all of the people who've been building all of the new rocket fuselages that had to be built after every NASA launch. And it's like, no, he's actually created massive new jobs because he created a new value. Values are sources of new and more values. It's win-win. It's not a zero-sum game where, like, you create a new technology and now people are losing and they've totally lost.
Yeah, and values are not finite, right? There's an infinite number of values. Each value creates more values, and human desire and human will and there's no end to it. There's no end to what we want and what we can have. So it's mind-boggling to me that people even worry about it. There's so many. I mean, you can't imagine the jobs. I use the example always of like 30 years ago, there wasn't such a thing as a nail salon. I mean, there were, but like in Beverly Hills,
Yeah.
a few places like that.
Yeah.
Now they're in every strip mall in America. There's one, right? And they employ hundreds of thousands of people.
Mhm.
And I think people go there and they bond and their relationships and so it's something that's very human, and it's available to everybody now because it's cheap. And who would have imagined that you would have an industry that employs hundreds of thousands of people to polish nails? I couldn't. I still don't get it, really, but I can't argue with reality. It is what it is, right? And you just extrapolate from that as you become wealthier, what is possible, right? I mean, why can't we all have personal chefs? I mean, we're busy, men and women now, both have professions, and why can't you have personal chefs for everybody? And if you're wealthy enough, and AI is doing a lot of this stuff, we'd be rich enough to be able to do that, just like we're rich enough now to get our nails done. So there's no end to even at the low end to the number of possibilities that one could imagine in terms of what people would be required to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know if you want to take the next question because you've got your.
Yeah, we got a bunch.
Yeah, that's okay. Happy to keep going.
Adam, what are your thoughts on the morality of listening to copyrighted music, movies on platforms like YouTube? How about downloading from such platforms and listening to watching on your own device?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So so YouTube actually is primarily a licensed provider of copyrighted works now, because they actually entered into a private agreement. See, again, these things that they say that Google said we can't do, it's impossible to do it. But they actually entered into a private agreement with with all of the studios and with music producers and everything, which is why, for instance, if you put up something on YouTube that violates someone else's copyright, it gets screened out and taken down, actually, and blocked.
I know my once in a while they accuse me of copyright infringement, and they try to do that to me.
Yeah, the algorithm doesn't always work, right? It's got some,
It's a little quirky, yeah.
Yes, we're not at the robot revolution yet, but so yeah, so I don't think there's any problem whatsoever with watching stuff on YouTube. And then sometimes you have to be careful, because it's also like the copyright owners themselves oftentimes allow people to use their works in various ways. So this is why there's massive amounts of Star Wars fan fiction. People don't realize this, but because Lucas, back at when he realized he wasn't going to do any more films after the Return of the Jedi, and he really should have stopped. He adopted what we call in the law an open licensing system. And an open licensing system is essentially an open permission with the right of the copyright owner to say, I withdraw permission. I reserve the right to withdraw permission, but everyone has permission if they want to do it. And the reason why he wanted to retain control is because he didn't want there to be Star Wars pornography and things like that. But other than that, this is how you got the explosion of this whole extended universe that got created in the 1990s and all this. And there's all of these videos and films on YouTube. All of these actually are allowed through this through this open licensing program that Lucas embraced, and that Disney, when they purchased Lucasfilm, continued. So I mean, so you shouldn't necessarily assume like, oh, this is bad or this is wrong or there's some type of improper activity occurring here. Now, there are companies like Spotify and others that do exploit, piracy and use that as a leverage to drive down royalties that they pay and things of this sort. But at a certain level, you like when you go to the grocery store, you don't say to yourself, when you're checking out the grocery store, you don't say to the you checkout person, do you pay for everything? Are you a moral person? Are you right?
Yeah.
At a certain level, you as just a person in the world, I think you have to say, all right, there's a large company here that's making millions of dollars. They sell stock. And, at a certain point, you have to just say, if they're doing something bad, that's beyond my kind of purview of what I know. And I get a value from it, and I'm paying them. I mean, you pay Spotify, you pay them a fee to use their service. So they're clearly providing a service in some legitimate way, and my job is just to make sure that that's on the up and up, and that from everything that I kind of know in my context, it looks like that it's on the up and up. And I think that that's all you really have to expect of yourself, because otherwise you would you'd have to inquire into the moral status of every single individual and every single company, from your gas station to your automobile manufacturer to the nail salon that you go
Yeah, yeah.
to.
So Hyperreason asked this small question. What are the steps transition to laissez-faire capitalism, and how will essential services like courts, law enforcement, and military be funded?
Uh,
That's like a whole show, Hyperreason.
yeah.
It's,
And also it's a bit, so, I mean, we're so far from that. Like, it's a
yeah,
bit like fiddling while Rome burns. I mean, like, it's an interesting intellectual exercise. And when I was in college, I really loved talking about these issues and thinking this, how would we do this and stuff like that. And, but actually, there's actually some essays in Capitalism, Not Ideal, or Ayn Rand, and some of the authors in there talk about with the ways in which you can fund the government through, like, fees. By the way, when you file a lawsuit with court, you have to pay a fee. And so there's no reason why, you can't add more to the fee to file these lawsuits, to add operating costs and things of
yeah,
this. I mean, if these were the sole reasons why we didn't have laissez-faire capitalism, then we would have had laissez-faire capitalism years ago, because business
absolutely.
persons all want to make money and figure out ways to make things work.
All right, questions just keep rolling in. If AI augments one's consciousness, should one's discussions with an AI program be protected under the Fifth Amendment, more so than, say, one's Google search history?
All right, I am not an first of all, I am not an expert on the Fifth Amendment a prohibition against self-incrimination.
Yeah.
I last studied it when I studied constitutional law 20 or 25 years ago, broadly.
Yeah.
So I can't really answer that question because I don't know actually what the law asks. But as a general rule of thumb, the principle is you can't be mandated or mandated to incriminate yourself in any proceeding before the government. So that could result in you being charged with a crime or something of that sort, right? So we all know the famous scenes in court, shows on TV. I plead the fifth,
Yeah.
or upon advice of counsel, I plead the fifth. We also see people say that at congressional hearings sometimes. And by the way, the fifth isn't about your conversations with other people necessarily. It's about anything you write. It's about anything you engage in or do. And so, just as a general matter of principle, if we have new technology that you're using to create potentially incriminating evidence that could be used against you, you have the right to say you can't use this. Now, you're blending the Fifth with the Fourth Amendment, which prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures. And that's a kind of a broader issue. And I think that should be largely defined by property rights and not privacy.
Mhm.
And or expectations of privacy, as the current law is largely defined. And if you own your AI system and you're using it to produce certain stuff, then the government needs a warrant to search it.
Yeah. All right. How do you see AI affecting patent search? Could an AI assisted patent process costing less time and money encourage more invention?
Yeah. So what he's talking about is the fact that all patents are published.
Yeah.
So which is a key function of what makes patents property rights in two ways. One is it's like a title deed that's published in your county courthouse. Anyone can go look at the title deed and say, I know what the scope of your property right is.
Yep.
So that serves licensing and other types of commercial transactions. And the other one is because to make the information public, then other people can design upon it, build upon it. It takes us out of trade secrecy and guild socialism, which existed before the patent system. And so and it facilitates through these public title deeds more innovation, more development of technologies, and more licensing, because when someone builds on something that's patented, they have to get a license from the original patent owner.
Yep.
If their thing that they built on it. So, like, for instance, Thomas Edison designed the the metal transmitter used in Bell's telephone that becomes the dominant form of all of the transmitters used in the Bell's telephone. So he designed this on the basis of Bell's invention of the telephone. So he had to get a license from Bell, and Bell got a license from him to use his transmitter in their respective telephones that they use, which they did, and people got more telephones. So what they're talking about is you can search this database so this is a public database. It's on the internet. It's at the patent office. It's right now it's a really horrible search capability. So actually everyone uses Google Patents. I use Google Patents actually. So you can search Google Patents and it's a much better search capacity. And yeah, AI will certainly help. Because it most certainly will help make it much easier and faster to search existing patents. So as a company, you'll be able to do a search much more easily to determine if something you've invented actually is already covered by a patent. So you know whether to get a license or not even try to get a patent, as well as build upon existing patents. Yeah.
Let's see. Ryan says, cool Vader helmet. Do you like Star Wars? What is your opinion of the new trilogy?
Yes, I do.
We've opened a can of worms here, guys. I don't know.
This is a subscriber, Yaron, of which he knows not of which he speaks.
Yeah.
You can be forgiven.
You
For
got
those who don't know,
here,
I am a massive Star Wars fan. I will not go on and on and on about this. I will save you both, Yaron, and the rest of his audience from this. Yes, I am a huge Star Wars fan. And in fact, I structure a lot of my first year property course around Star Wars themes, in part because we're studying some really old, crazy doctrines, and so it's hard for the students to really appreciate and have fun with. So it's ways to kind of make it more fun for them and entertaining. There are things that I like about Star Wars I love Andor and some of those shows. I hate other things. So
Andor was very good.
Yeah, Andor is incredible. I loved Andor. I love the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian. I really I enjoyed some of the other shows like Obi-Wan Kenobi and things of that sort. But look, for me, I wear it on my sleeve. This is why Yaron was like, oh my God, I wear it on. But it's also like Star Wars is not great art. It's fun art. It's pop culture. It's enjoyable, right? But it's not Beethoven. It's not, the Shawshank Redemption or something like that. It's, you enjoy it for what it is, and I try to enjoy it for the fun that it is. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Adam says, is there an objective definition of fair use?
Yeah. So I don't, yes, I think you can have an objective definition of it, but you're not going to understand it through as objectively if you're thinking of it through this package deal invalid concept of fair use. So that term didn't even exist until 1976. So essentially, what fair use does is not something that is done in all property rights systems, whether you're talking about land and other property rights systems, which is that there are certain interferences that are strictly speaking are infringements of property rights, and the property owner would come after you, but for the fact that you really haven't caused any damage, and it's $1 maybe for all intents and purposes. An example of this would be, for instance, someone pulling into your driveway to turn around, and when they're going down a street the wrong way, they have technically trespassed. They have technically come onto your property, right? And and without your permission. Now, could they sue you for trespass? Yes. I mean, they would have the legal right to do so. Will they sue you? No. And every once in a while, people have sued. You get the crazy person who's like, I'm suing. And the courts have said, you're not harmed by this. Yes, your rights have been infringed, but you haven't been harmed in this context, because you can imagine a scenario, I guess, where you would be harmed by it.
Yep.
But I define my situation where it's not a harm, it's just your regular car. And so you get $1, which represents, if you ever hear of someone got a $1 court judgment, that represents your rights were violated, but you were not harmed in the real world. And that occurred in the copyright context sometimes. People would use someone's work, a teacher would use a portion of a work. It didn't interfere. It wasn't stopping people from buying the work, and it wasn't interfering with the commercial deployment of it. Or it was used once and never again. And so, and by the way, they recognized this and deployed. In fact, if I believe historically, they cited to some of these other property cases as examples of what they were recognizing copyright as the same type of issue because it's a property right. And so, in the 1976, they say, well, this is really about fairness and about balancing the rights of the copyright owner against the rights of the public. And they wrote, and so that's invalid. That's a package deal with an invalid definition of what the right is and what the nature of what the issue is and things of that sort. I think if you go back to the original historical understanding in the courts, because this evolved through court decisions starting in the 19th century, I think you do get a better understanding of what this field of fair use of what we call now.
All right, we're going at 2.5 hours, guys, or 2 hours 15. So
How's the money? How are we doing? Am I helping you raise a lot of money?
we're doing okay. We're doing pretty good. We're doing pretty good.
Keep coming, guys. Keep it coming. I'm
Yeah.
happy to keep going as long as you are.
All right. So Enric says, so Spider-Man, it was Stan Lee's idea, and he edited which physical drawing is chosen, and Ditko conceptualized and drew the accepted version.
Yes.
Is Ditko the only creator or a combination with Stan?
It's a combination with Stan. And I mean, I don't know the exact facts, so I'll take the facts as given. And he's asking that question because there's, of course, there's a Spider-Man on up there.
Oh, there you go. And plus, Ditko is like a pseudo-objectivist or something,
Yes, yeah. So, can you have multiple contributors to the creation of a creative work? Yes, and then they own it together, in a type of property right called a concurrent estate, more broadly. And then there's different types of concurrent estates. They're called joint tenancies or tenancies in common. Those terms come from different ways that people own tangible physical things in the world, land and personal things like bicycles and stuff like that. Like I own my house in joint tenancy with my wife. Yaron, you probably own your house in a joint tenancy with your wife. And so they took that same idea that had been applied in other areas of property and said, yes, you can have multiple owners, and where then they define and carve up the rights between the multiple owners and how they can control and use that particular asset. And in fact, this exists not just in the creation of a single thing like Spider-Man, where you have two contributors. So songs have like 6 or 7 different copyright owners. There's the person who writes the music. There's the person who writes the lyrics. There's the person who sings it. There's the person, and so this is one of the reasons why ASCAP and BMI came into existence, because there was a real need to bring together in a single commercial entity the ability to get one license with multiple owners of the song. So each having to get permission from them to use it. So this is not, this happens, and you have dual ownership. I teach these issues in patent law when you have multiple inventors, multiple people who contribute to the creation of an invention. And I teach this issue in property law. Yeah, it's a great way. And by the way, it shows you, again, property is not the thing. It's the value that's been created in the thing, in the abstraction. And if people are contributing different values to that thing, and they've created it, or they're claiming different ownership rights in those values, then you can have multiple property rights that overlap with each other and interrelate and integrate with each other, and can be recognized and enforced through the law, in which we've done for centuries. And it's a really cool example of how the legal system recognized this, even with land and regular physical goods, and then easily extended it to the creation of intellectual property.
Michael asks, Adam, do you foresee a fascist takeover of the United States?
Let me get out my crystal ball. I do not see a fascist takeover anytime soon. I will say that. I do not think the coming election is the whole state of our democracy is at stake with the coming election. I think now, if we continue on the path we're going, will at some point we end up in some type of tyranny? Is it fascism? Is it social communism? Yes, if we continue on this path. I mean, when will it happen? I don't know, but I know it's not happening next year, or in even 5 or 10 years, or even probably my lifetime. Now, but I will say one thing about the election. We have awful choices, right? Neither of them are good. I don't like and I think you can legitimately say this particular issue is incredibly important to me. And I feel comfortable enough about this person, this candidate voting for this issue. And I care about this issue. I think it's important. I've objectively assessed why I think it's important in my life and in society. And this is why I'm voting for this, as opposed to the other candidate. But that's not because this candidate is necessarily a better candidate or a better person, or will save democracy or not save or stop the overtaking of our country with other type of bad stuff. We have awful choices, and we have to make decisions about this. And a decision to also not participate is also, I think, a legitimate decision. If it's objectively
just to get an explicit answer for you, not your average algorithm is asking, Adam, will you be voting for Trump?
Yes. And the reason why I wasn't originally, I was originally going to sit out this election and say, I'm not voting. Hawks in both their houses.
Yeah.
October 7th changed my position on this. And now, and because I think we are truly in a war between civilization and barbarism. And what is now called the Biden doctrine by some people on Twitter, the selling out of U.S. allies by the Biden administration, which has really been the Warren Sanders Obama administration, in Afghanistan, and even tying the hands of Ukraine, preventing them from being able to attack Russia, fully with the weapons that we've been giving them. And of course, the attacks on Israel and tying their hands, and the appeasement, the explicit appeasement, both from Obama and through Biden of Iran, really, October 7th made it very clear what's going to happen if Iran gets the bomb. Yeah. We are in an existential crisis right now, and the candidate between Biden and even now Kamala Harris is far worse than Biden and Trump. Trump has defended Israel. He moved, he recognized the Golan Heights. He recognized Jerusalem. He moved our embassy to Jerusalem. He has repeatedly said Israel has the right to defend itself, and it should destroy Hamas, and attack the others. He's not telling Israel take the win when they're attacked and they happen to deflect a couple missiles. So that's why. But I'm not kidding myself. I could be wrong about this, and I'm not trying to say Trump is a good man, because if someone says to me, and some people have said this to me, I can't get over January 6th. January 6th was such a destructive attack on our institutions and our government. Mm-hmm. That is just not acceptable to me. And I see us domestically under attack in the same way you see us as internationally. I have no response to that. I think that's a legitimate position to take, and I can't say no to that person. I think that we're under an existential threat much more severely in this clash with Iran and this war with barbarism and nihilism. And that's why I'm now going to vote for Trump. But I had to come to this after October 7th through a process of several of the past 9 months of witnessing the rise of anti-Semitism, the attacks, the nihilism, the blatant nihilism and vile attacks that are occurring, the assaults on Jews in our streets, the firebombing of synagogues and synagogue buses. A synagogue bus in Canada was firebombed yesterday. The painting of swastikas and the Hamas up down synagogue on synagogues. I see us under a really serious attack here by nihilism that expresses itself through anti-Semitism. And so that's why I'm voting for him on Israel, in support of Israel, and the support of Israel, of what Netanyahu said in his speech before Congress, where he said, we're fighting the front lines. In fact, you don't have to put boots on the ground because we are. And there's a certain truth to that. I wish he would be more.
Really?
I wish he would be more consistent about that and would actually do it in a way that he says in words and never does in action.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but
He
yeah,
needs to live up to his, he gives a great speech. He's always given a great
I
speech.
know. You can't
And
help but cheer his speeches and then be pissed eternally for months and years afterwards because he never actually does what he says in his speeches.
Yeah.
Yeah, frustrates me.
He has a day of reckoning coming at some points. I don't know when and how and where, but he can't. I don't think he should be allowed to escape some level of responsibility for October 7th. I mean, he allowed Hamas to exist, to thrive, to grow, to get money from Qatar, to do everything, and kind of establish this mentality within the Israeli military of, no, they won't attack us. Everything's good.
I agree.
He has to pay a price for that.
He has to be held accountable, and and I think he will ultimately be held accountable.
I hope so. I hope so.
By the way, but I do want to say I don't. I mean, so Trump is, he's a pig of a person. He says he says horrible, vile, vicious things. He lives the life of the arbitrary. But but I have to say this: when you look at his actual policies in his first term, not what he said on Twitter and not when he said his speeches and not, but when you look at his actual policies, I have a hard time finding him doing anything worse than in actual policy than the bad things that have been done by all of the prior Republican presidents before him. I can find really bad policies that Bush implemented. Bush 43 did the whole bailouts after the
all of them.
Yeah, he took over. He literally took over General Motors. He had the federal government running General Motors. That's fascism.
That was Obama, I think.
No.
First, it was
started
Bush.
with Bush.
Okay.
It started with Bush. That was the TARP.
Bush is on my list of worst presidents. That was the TARP program that got passed under Bush. So TARP is a whole other.
I mean, Obama took it to the next level, right?
Yeah.
But is he horrible? Did he have horrible, but so anyway, so I don't, and I know some of the people that they're talking about being potentially in his administration, like Governor Youngkin, my current governor and stuff. And my hope is that happens again. But I'm not a fan of him. I don't support him, and I'm not voting for him because I think he's a wonderful person and he's going to save this country.
Yep. That would take quite a leap.
Well, there are people who act like that.
I know.
Trump, even among objectivists. And people act like that about Biden, even though Biden's not really running the country.
No, I mean, we're not going to be saved by politicians, that's for sure. It's just a question of the speed with which it declines, speed at which things get worse. And in some realms, they might get better. In some realms, they'll get worse. I mean, I worry about Ukraine with Trump. There's a lot to worry about one way or another.
I mean, like I said, like people get thrown off by me on Twitter because I'll tweet things about how and Ukraine's fighting a valid war, that we should be supporting them against it. And people get all angry at me. They're like, how can you say that Ukraine is Putin was threatened by NATO? I'm like, are you crazy? That's just, I mean, it's the same thing. They got attacked by a nihilistic.
It's the same civilizational war. Exactly. It's the same civilization.
Exactly. So, and so I'm a bit of an unusual person, I guess, in this respect. But like I said, I was originally not going to vote. I was just going to say I can't. But now because of this.
I'm in this great position where being a citizen of Puerto Rico, I can't vote. So we're not allowed to vote for president. So no taxation without representation, I think. So it's so we're not taxed. We don't pay federal taxes, and we don't vote for president.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. See, you're taking what you want, but you pay for it. You don't get but that's a good deal.
I'll take that deal any day. Yes. So Michael says, I notice a lot of objectivist intellectuals are having children. So they must not be that pessimistic about the future. What do you think?
Yeah, did I say I was pessimistic about or I hope I didn't give the impression that I was like, oh my God, we're circling the toilet.
I think he's talking to me more than anybody else, and
Okay.
I alternate, between my more pessimistic moments and my more optimistic ones.
Yeah. I mean, well, Yaron has kids. You're not, yours aren't kids anymore. Mine are still kids. I have three kids.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I've said on my show that I think having children is an expression of optimism about the future, right? And one of the reasons I
well,
think birth
yeah.
rates have declined in the West and birth rate decline in Asia is a certain pessimism. I wouldn't be surprised if climate change and all the the hysteria about the end of the world. Why would you have kids if you buy into even a fraction of that? Why would you have kids?
I think that's 100% correct. I mean, if you really, I mean, in fact, you would be a monster if you really did think the world was
Yep.
ending, was going to burn up in a fireball because of climate change next year, and you chose to have a baby, right? Because I mean, that means you're knowingly bringing someone into the world who is going to suffer and suffer and pain, and it's just so clearly But this is the benevolent universe premise, right? Ideas drive human culture. There's no historical necessity that we are going to end up in a dictatorship or a collectivist regime. I mean, this is a war of ideas, and things look bad at times, but things looked really bad in the 1960s. I mean, really bad. Then, if you ever read like how bad 1968 was, we had two political assassinations.
Yep.
Right? We had, Martin Luther King, and then RFK, right? And by the way, assassinated by a Palestinian who was assassinated because of U.S. support for Israel. And we had a total breakdown of some of our political institutions. They had the riots at the Democratic Convention in Chicago, where
Might have them again this year.
yeah, I don't, they'll try, like they tried at the Republican convention, but they were kept at bay. But um, you know, it was a, really, just a period where you would have legitimately thought that our country was
Yep.
falling apart and it was not going to survive in a couple of years. But I don't think we're there. We're not there, and I do have optimism, and I do think that, that there are good people, and there are good people working to both create new values, and there are good scholars and thinkers who are trying to argue and defend the good.
So not your average algorithm says, what are your thoughts on Puerto Rico's tax situation? I don't know if you know anything about Puerto Rico's tax. Some of us pay very little taxes. I'm sure Adam is very happy for me.
So is like the question, like, is it unfair to other people, or?
Well, it's certainly unfair to other Puerto Ricans, but I think, um, they shouldn't have to pay taxes either at the level that they pay.
Yeah. I mean, no one should pay taxes. I
Yeah.
mean, this is the one of the most horrible things that they taught, that their framings or concepts that they have in Washington, D.C. and the federal government, is when they talk about um when they talk about tax breaks being a
Yes, a cost.
cost, a
Yes.
cost.
The money is the government's, and they're letting you keep some of it.
Yes, it's a cost to us when we give you that is such a moral and conceptual inversion. Like,
Absolutely.
it's insane. Yeah. And so, I mean, hey, if they've created a tax haven and people go to it, wonderful, more power to them. I don't necessarily want to live in Puerto Rico, so but so I'm happy that people like your own do, and that he gets more money to do more cool things.
So Jim asked, what kind of contracts were used by oil companies and Middle Eastern interests, and why were they seemingly unenforceable when their properties were nationalized?
So I don't know the exact details on the specific contracts that they had per se. But there was, because when the oil wells were nationalized, it wasn't because it was because of the contracts. It was the government, the Middle Eastern governments just stepped in and said, we have the guns and we're taking this over. I mean, that was the end of it. I
The
mean,
only party that could have enforced them was the US or Britain
or
or the
Britain, yeah, because
Allies.
a
And
lot of it was originally a British mandate, and these were British colonies and originally. And by the way, so they was large probably under British law that in if there were contracts. And so it really was the obligation of England and Britain and the United States, insofar there were some American oil companies, if there were any, to step in and to say no. In fact, the US did that sometimes, not with the oil, but when that whatever tin pot dictator was and nationalized the banana fields in the Caribbean in the 1950s, and I think it was Eisenhower, he sent in the U.S. military, took back the banana fields because they were owned by Dole, and he said, you can't do that. Those are all that what?
The same Eisenhower, the 1956,
Yeah,
the French and the British said to Nasser in Egypt, you can't nationalize the Suez Canal. We built it, it's ours. And they
yeah,
threw the troops in, and the French and the British, and Eisenhower forced them to back off and
yeah,
leave and handed it to Nasser and changed the Middle East. So Eisenhower could go either way. And this is American foreign policy, unfortunately, since World War II, at least, probably
yeah.
from forever, is completely inconsistent.
Yeah,
But if
yeah. I wasn't trying to say
America was
Eisenhower was
willing to enforce
necessarily.
property rights consistently, the world would be a different place.
Yeah,
Um,
yes. Oh, an entirely different place. Because first of all, none of these Arab states would be these rich, wealthy states because they didn't create that wealth. They stole it.
yeah.
The oil companies, Shell and Chevron and the British BP, British Petroleum, they created the wealth. And their oil wells would still exist and would be protected, and they would, and I mean, and then we wouldn't be facing a nuclear Iran and all of these terrorists and stuff. Yeah, I mean, it would be an entirely different world right now.
But that's, of course, the challenge when you have a contract with the government. Who enforces it? If the government decides to use force against you, then there's nobody to enforce it unless there's another government that is willing to step in. And that's very beware when you contract with the government.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's
I mean,
why,
in the US, we have the courts, but you can imagine in an authoritarian state, government says to hell with the courts, it doesn't matter.
right, exactly. Well, and that's what I mean. The United States government, it's technically it's the same way. I mean, it has sovereign immunity. It can do whatever it wants to do at the end of the day. It's just that the founders put into the constitutions various restrictions, the contract clause and others, and and takings clause, so that if it violates a contract, you can sue it.
Yep.
And Congress has passed laws that allow you to sue the government to ignore its claimed sovereign immunity, because we have a government that respects individual rights. But then sometimes it doesn't. But then sometimes it doesn't do that. So like when it poses price controls on patents.
All right. Yeah. So last question, Rue Downs. Do copyrights require attribution to artists? He says, often photos are used and stolen on Instagram without crediting the photographer. This often comes up under Moral Rights or Visual Artist Rights Act.
Yeah. So copyright law does not require attribution. U.S. copyright law. Other copyright systems do. And they're referring to that. So the United States has a very unique copyright system in the same way we have a very unique patent system. Other countries have this system that they call it moral rights, and where it's this Hegelian notion that since the artist puts themselves into a work in the world, that therefore when they sell it to other people, they don't never fully alienate it, because you can't fully alienate yourself, right? By the way, you can hear Marx's alienation critique of capitalism here. And so in their copyright systems, this is why they require that you have to have attribution, and artists always have you hear sometimes about artists in Europe like dictating, like, oh, you can't put my sculpture in this place in this particular spot and things like that. So no, the U.S. copyright law does not require attribution. A lot of people think like, oh, well, as long as I attribute them on the internet, then that's okay. But I mean, you should acknowledge people. I mean, because it's not your work, and especially if it's a context where someone might think it's yours, you have actually, I do think you have a moral obligation to recognize that, no, this is created by someone else. The same reason that you have when you're arguing your views about something, and someone says to you, "Oh, that's incredible. Like, when did you come up with this? And are you going to write about this someday?" And I think you have a moral obligation to say, "I didn't come up with these ideas. I got these from a philosopher, Ayn Rand."
Yeah.
And so, so I do think you have a moral obligation to recognize and attribute people for their work, but it's not a requirement of copyright. Now, they have adopted, there's this, what they're referring to at the end of their question is this new law that was passed about 10 or 15 years ago, the Visual Authors' Rights Act, which does implement some of these attribution requirements, but it's very limited and it's narrow to certain contexts and certain things. And it's kind of and I think it's an improper type of law.
All right. This has been great.
That's it? Really?
That's it.
I want to
2
keep going,
hours,
Yaron.
40 minutes. You're just getting warmed up, huh?
I'm ready to go another 2 hours.
To be young again.
I appreciate that because I know I always feel so young now that I'm well over 50.
All right. Well, thank you. It's really been a pleasure. This has been fun.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. Thanks to all the super chatters for participating. I will see you guys tomorrow, as always. And I'll see Adam somewhere, someplace.
Some event.
Yeah, sometime.
I'll see you on the line. But thank you, Yaron, for having me on your show. It's always been awesome.
Pleasure.
Really.
Pleasure.
Cheers.
Bye, everybody.